Hey, what you're about to see is a full drum tracking workshop that I recently taught live, and this goes deep. You're going to learn about drum and cymbal sizes, what drum heads to use, how to tune the drums, how to mic up a kit properly, and how to manage a session and coach the drummer to get the best performances possible. And if this is the type of in-depth training you're looking for, you don't have to stop here. We've got a full suite of training walking you through how to track the rest of the band, as well as how to edit and mix professionally. And this full package of training used to sell for over $1,000, but I recently bundled it inside the Black Salt Audio Artist Pass along with all of my plugins. So if you learn a lot from this video and if you get value from it, the next step is to go to blacksaltaudio.com and join the Artist Pass, and you'll get full instant access to all of my plugins plus all of my pro level courses for an insanely low price. All right, now enjoy this training. So welcome guys, welcome to the drum tracking workshop. Got an awesome day ahead here. You're going to learn a lot. I'm assuming since you're here, you bought a ticket, you probably know a little bit about who I am. I'm Jordan Valeriot, producer, engineer, and mixer. I've worked with bands like Silverstein, Neck Deep, Counterparts, Intervals, Nick Johnson, Emery. And the reason I'm doing this workshop, or really just teach stuff in general, is because I know what the journey's like. You know, there was certainly a big chunk of time in my life where I did not have the skills or the quality or the knowledge to be able to work with artists like that at that level. And so I know what it's like specifically with drums to be confused, stressed out, and also like disappointed in the sound of the tracks I'm capturing, right? But on the flip side, I know what it's like to come through that and merge on the other side to have complete confidence and control and be satisfied with what I'm doing. And just a quick example of that. This is a picture of a drum setup I used for one of the Silverstein records. It was like my first kind of, quote, big label project, right? So it actually had a budget to go into a bigger studio and track drums there. And so we did that for a few days. And I made all the mistakes in the book there because I went into this big studio and the SSL console, all of these Neve preamps, this huge collection of mics, right? And so I went way off the script, where I didn't really have a script then. I didn't really have a plan. I was still kind of haphazard in my approach. And so I felt like just because they had all these mics and all these inputs, I had to use them all, right? So I had like 3 mics on the kick. I had, I think, 3 mics on the snare. You can't really see it. I had like, I think 4 or 5 pairs of room mics, and none of them really sounded very good. Like, it was a total mess. I hooked up so many mics and channels that I was so overwhelmed. It was hard for me to focus on the performance and process because I was just holding so much information in my mind just in terms of the signal chains and everything. And it was a mess. And, the drum tracks don't sound that great on that album, even though there was all this budget and this fancy gear in this fancy studio. Now, contrast that, fast forward to last year, fast forward more than 10 years ahead, right? This is a recent drum session I did. And this one, the feeling was completely different. Okay, I felt in total control, calm, confident. I knew exactly which mics I wanted to use. I knew where I wanted to put them. I knew how I wanted the drums to sound, how I was going to tune them. I knew how to guide the performance. And I even had the level of confidence where there was the engineer who worked there. I think he was in his 60s. He's been engineering his whole life, right? And he's questioning me every step of the way. Are you sure you want to use that on kick? Are you sure you want to put that mic there? Are you sure you don't want to try these mics for overheads? Or what about putting a room mic here, and stuff like that. And I just had no interest in deviating from my plan. I knew exactly how to get the drum sound I wanted, total confidence. And even though someone was that much older than me and, had seemingly that much more experience, it was his studio. It was like, nope, I know what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing. And, it turned out great. And I really think that being able to nail the drum tracking is like one of the holy grails of engineering, right? It's kind of a test for engineers because there's a lot of complexity to it. There's a lot of things to manage, right? It's not just like one guitar amp or one singer. There's like 10 or 12 pieces of the kit that you're trying to mic up. So there's a lot of things to manage. They're loud, they're messy, there's a lot of bleed. And so because of the challenges there, this can really set you apart as an engineer, being able to track drums really well. And if you put vocals aside, next to vocals, drums are the most important thing in your mix. Like, people always notice bad drums. If your guitar tone's not great, like, stuff like that, you can kind of get away with it if your drums and vocals are good. But if your drums are bad, they're hitting the next button on Spotify, right? People always notice that. So you definitely want to be known as a guy who gets great drums. Okay, and yes, these days, there's samples, there's MIDI drums, but in my opinion, you don't want to be the program drums guy forever, right? You don't want to be pigeonholed into that little niche, because I still believe that to build a lasting career in the studio, you have to have versatile skills, right? And I think today with YouTube and everything, like, there's a lot of what I call DAW ninjas out there who, they learn the little tips and techniques, the little tricks from certain people, and they've got the right samples or they've got the right drum program and whatever, and they can program together something that sounds like whatever is on trend right now. But if they have to go and do something different, like a different genre, or the trends change, they're kind of stuck and they get left behind, right? So there's not many like real engineers today compared to all the DAW ninjas out there. But even if you are someone who's using a lot of MIDI drums, it's actually in your best interest to learn how to track drums and understand the process behind it, because it's going to make your MIDI drums better, right? If you can actually get in the room with real drummers or experiment with real drum tracks and know what live drum tracking sounds like and feels like, that's going to influence the way you program the dynamics and the timing and all of that stuff into your MIDI drums. Is going to make them that much better, right? So this really is one of the cornerstones of pro engineering, right? And your guys are going to walk away today with a complete method, a complete foolproof method. All right. And of course, tracking drums is just one part of the whole picture. That's one part of making a record, right? I do have a complete method that I could teach you for everything else, like tracking guitars, tracking bass, tracking vocals, and then moving on from there, how to edit everything, and then mixing, right? Even when it comes to building your reputation, gaining clients, making a career in the studio, there's a whole method out there that I can teach you as well. And I just want to kind of confront this false belief that's out there. And you'll see this a lot online, right? As people say, hey, there's no formula. There's no formula for making records, right? You guys see this a ton, like on my YouTube comments. Just scroll through there. Like, there's always people pushing back on what I'm teaching. Say, hey, there's no formula. This is not going to work every time. People say there's no such thing as a right way. Well, is it any wonder that most people's mixes and recordings don't sound good, right? Like, if you believe that is not a formula you can follow that's going to work, it's all just up to chance and feel and trial and error, then like you don't even know what you're aiming for. And if you don't know what you're aiming for, then of course there's no map to get you there. So of course your final mix is going to suck, right? And don't get me wrong, of course every song and artist is different and we need to adapt our knowledge to serve that song and artist. But to say that there's no formula and that you can't learn a process that works, like that is just plain wrong, honestly, guys. Like, there is a formula, trust me. The pros know it. The pros do the same thing day in and day out. They don't change their process all the time like beginners do. Okay? There's a whole lot of things about recording and mixing that are formulaic that will work every time. Yeah, the only problem is that you just don't know them all yet. That's why your stuff isn't sounding like the pros do, okay? So the goal is to teach you part of that formula today. So we're about to get into that. You're going to see, again, just how foolproof this is, repeatable it is. I guarantee you, the next time you track drums and follow this approach, it is going to sound better. It might sound like 10 times better. This is a testimonial that someone gave after one of my drum workshops that I ran. I ran this exact workshop a number of times now, but mostly last year. And this guy said, hey, just signed up a couple days ago after the drum workshop, recorded a drummer over the weekend, and the difference in sound quality is amazing. I even had one guy at a recent drum workshop who, after the first session, so the first session we're going to talk about tuning the drums, and he came back for the second session and he's like, hey, I just went to my drum kit and I tuned my drums like that, and wow, it actually worked. It sounds way better. So this stuff is really going to work quickly. And after today, guys, there is going to be an opportunity to keep learning with me, keep going, get the full blueprint for tracking everything and getting raw tracks that sound better than most people's final mixes. And then again, how to edit for tightness while still having it sound human, doing it quickly, getting mixes that translate everywhere, that hit hard, that can compete with any record on Spotify. And that is called the Pro Production System. It's my full program. And if you want to go down that path further after today and go deeper, I do have a special offer where you're going to actually get a nice size credit towards that program if you decide to continue on. More on that later, though. Let's dive in. Let's get into the nitty-gritty here. This session is called Reverse Engineering the Modern Heavy Drum Sound. Now, you're going to hear me say this a lot today, but you need to start with the end in mind. Start with the end in mind. So let's begin there. Okay, what is the goal for rock and metal drums? What is the end point that we want? I want you guys to type in the chat and describe the drum sound that you are trying to achieve. Okay, describe it. Type it in the chat there. I know there's a few seconds delay here. All right, so we got tight, punchy, clear, articulate, good. Aggressive, weight, dynamic, punchy. Larger than life, hard hitting, but still natural. I love that, Marco. Clear, punchy, front of the mix, balanced, heavy, clean, punchy, big, defined, present, explosive drums, modern with usable sounds, tight, full. Roa says like real drums. Pig Pretty says a drum sound that competes and stands tall for years to come. That's great. Natural but not clipping. Okay, awesome. Second part of the question. Do you guys think that you need to use samples to get there? Do you have to use samples to get to these types of sounds you're describing? Okay, Michael says no. Shotgun says no. Anthony says not always. I am currently, depends on genre. Yes, if source is good, sample's not needed. Probably need some sample, but not entirely. Okay, good answers, guys. Not necessarily, sometimes. Okay. So look, this is not a trick question, guys. Most records, you will need to use samples. Most records, okay? But the reason I'm bringing that up is because tracking the drums really well still matters a huge amount, even if you're going to use samples. And ideally, in my opinion, you can blend samples in to enhance what you've got. Hopefully you're not always having to completely replace the kit with samples. But even if you do, you still have the overhead mics, you still have toms, you still have room mics. And the better those sound, the better your kit is going to sound as a whole, right? So everything else still has to sound great, even if you're augmenting or even replacing with samples. And the reason I'm asking these questions first is because most people don't even think about what they're trying to accomplish, right? They just go, right? They book a session, band comes in, they bring in the drum kit, they're throwing on mics. It's there's no stopping to think, okay, what am I actually trying to do here? And so a lot of common mistakes that people make for specifically rock and metal drums, they use the wrong drums, the wrong types of drums and wrong sizes of drums, the wrong cymbals and sizes of cymbals. They don't tune them well so that the tone isn't very good to begin with. A big mistake in this genre is using the wrong type of overhead mic technique, right? Using an overhead mic technique that is not going to accomplish the kind of cymbal sound that you want. And then, of course, like you saw what I did, which is overcomplicating it and sometimes just completely botching it and then having to try and rescue it in the mix with samples and editing, and you end up with a really stale robotic sound. And I made all of these mistakes myself, right? Like I said, I learned the hard way. I can give you a quick tour of even more of the mistakes that I made here. So check this out, guys. This is many, many years ago, probably 15 years ago, my old studio. Look at this drum kit. So I've got this ribbon mic kind of pointed half to the ground outside of the kick drum. The overheads are in front of the kit, kind of pointed towards the cymbals. If I show you a different angle of this kit, look at this. Look at this drum set. Look at that snare head. Oh my gosh. Looks like that thing's 10 years old. I've got a third mic on the snare. You can see it here. I mean, look, for one thing, the top and bottom mic are not even aligned, right? They're not even aligned with each other. And then I've got this third mic that's further away, So that's going to be a little bit out of phase, right? Like, what am I doing there? I have no idea. Obviously, I was proud enough of it to take a bunch of pictures. Here's another session, completely different session, same room. This time I've got the drums angled in the corner. I wonder why. I don't know. Look at the overheads this time. They're a lot higher up, and they're a little more over the kit. Drum heads are still super beat up, right? Here's another one. This is probably a year or two later. Oh, this time I'm using an XY or an ORTF on overheads. Wonder why I'm using that overhead position that time. Guess what? I had no idea. Just saw someone do it, so I was trying it out, right? No purpose behind what I'm doing. And then there's this one. Here's another drum session. At least I'm getting smarter now. I've got some acoustic treatment up, but now this is like overhead mix between like a ORTF and spaced pair. It's not really either of them. It's kind of weird. Why am I doing it that way? Again, no clue, guys. Just trying stuff. Just trying stuff, right? So I made all the mistakes. I had no formula. I had nothing repeatable. I was setting up the drums differently every time, different overhead configuration every time, just trying to get something that works, right? Without really any clear path. But again, what do we want in the end? We just described it, right? And I agree with everything you guys said, right? Like tight, punchy shells, not too much bleed. I think that's what you guys mean when you say clean, right? Clear, focused overheads, really big sounding room for size. And someone said this, a larger than life sound, but that still sounds like a drum kit. I think that is the sweet spot we want to hit today. We want something that's, yes, maybe you're using samples, you're mixing it aggressively, you're making it sound larger than life. I think that's what most people want to hear. That's how you compete out there. But if you want your record to stand the test of time and have people still listening to it 10 years from now, it needs to still sound like a real drummer playing a drum kit, right? Otherwise, it just kind of becomes trendy, and the trend changes, and then your record just sounds kind of dated, right? So we want that big, larger than life sound with some realism still, right? So I think everyone's in agreement with what we want, right? I didn't really see anyone type in the chat anything that was different, no one's typing in like soft jazz drums or something, okay? Like we all want big, tight, punchy, intense, larger than life drums, right? So now we know where we want to end up. We can go back to the start and we can begin and try and get there. So everything I'm about to show you is really simple, guys. It's not complicated. It's repeatable. You can use it at any studio with any drummer for rock, metal, pop too. Anytime you want a drum sound that you would describe with all those words we're describing it, you can use this approach. And I'm going to just play you some quick examples of where I've been using this drum tracking approach here. So these are 3 songs. I'm just going to play quick snippets of them. This is Silverstein.
You can't stop it now. It's already in motion. Don't try to fight it now. You're already down. She's taking over. Stop at the life you.
Okay, here's another one. Okay, one more example here. Okay, so those are just some quick examples for you. And the reason I'm showing you that is because those 3 songs, those represent like a 10-year span of time. The first 2, they were recorded in my little studio. You saw pictures of it. That's where those first 2 were recorded. And then the last one, that was recorded in a really big studio with completely different mics, completely unfamiliar environment, but I still use the exact same approach with tuning. Like I tuned the drums myself in all of those examples. I set up the mics myself. I did it the exact same approach that I'm going to teach you in all 3 of those. And they're all a little different, right? They all have a different flavor and vibe. So it's not like having a formula and a blueprint. It's not like it kills all of the uniqueness. Of course not. It's always a different person playing the drums. It's always a different song. It's a different drum kit. But the same approach, right? And I didn't change it over that whole period of time. So you saw how clueless I was in the beginning. Now you've heard eventually what I got to once I figured this out. And so I want to share this so you can skip all the mistakes, right? Or maybe if you've already been making these mistakes yourself, like from today onwards, you are a new man or woman. I don't know if we got any women here. but you're going to be a new person in the studio, okay? You're never going to be doing bad drum stuff again, okay? This is a fresh start. So let's break down the method. Let's start at the source with the instrument itself. Okay, of course we have to start there. So as I go through my method, guys, by the way, I'm going to be using screen sharing, showing you some tracks. I'm also going to show you some videos where I'm teaching you in the studio with a drum kit. And those videos, those are training videos taken directly out of my pro production system. This is what I teach my high-level students. You guys are going to get access to those today. So hopefully you guys have a notebook, pencil, pen. Get ready to take some notes here. So first topic we're going to talk about is getting the right drum sizes and cymbals. Okay, and a fun way to do this is I'm actually going to pull up Superior Drummer just to demonstrate some of this. So let's start with the kick drum. Kick drum sizes. So generally 20 or 22-inch kick drum. This is kind of the width side to side here, right? These are the most common kick drum sizes, and it's good for what we're going after here, right? And for the depth of the kick drum, anywhere from 14 to 18 inches deep is pretty normal and also going to suit us well. What you want to watch out for, what I really don't like too much, is having those really unusually deep kick drums that some guys get. You know, those super deep, like they look like a cannon shell or something. You know, they're 24, 26 inch deep. They look cool on stage or whatever, but you know, it's you're going to get too much muddy, woofy low end. It's going to be hard for you to position the mic close enough to the beater to get that nice attack. And also, the bigger the kick drum is, the louder it's going to be in the room. So look, guys, I do not want the kick drum to be louder than the snare in the room. Why? I want more snare drum in the room mics than kick. Okay, especially if there's a lot of double kick, if you're doing some metal stuff, or if the drummer really sucks. There are some ways that you can actually edit the kick separately from the rest of the kit, but you can only do that if there's not too much bleed in the room. So I do not want a kick drum that is the loudest part of the kit. All right, so that's something to keep in mind. You want to just stick with these standard sizes, 20 to 22 inch across, 14 to 18 inches deep. That's going to get you there. Okay, for tom sizes, oops, I wanted to play this for you too. So here's a 20 by 16 kick drum. Pretty standard size, pretty standard sound, right? Now for tom sizes, typically if you've got two toms, a rack and a floor, a 12 inch and a 16 inch, those are kind of classic sizes, right? Those are classic sizes. Here they are here. There's a 12, there's a 16. They go well together, right? Sometimes guys will bring in something higher, like a 10 inch like that. That fits well. What you want to watch out for is, you know, just an odd mismatch. So let's say someone brings in a 10 inch tom for the rack and like a 16 for the floor. And it's just a bit odd, right? It's a bit of an odd combo. You want them to be kind of complementary in pitch, but 12 and 16 inch classic tom sizes. It's pretty rare that you're going to run into tom sizes that are like much different than that, right? It's not like people are bringing in, you know, super weird, 13 inch toms or something. It's like, that's pretty unusual, right? So if you do run into that though, and you know the drummer comes in or they're telling you what sizes of kit they have, and it's like all this weird tom sizes, that's something to be aware of, and you should probably change it first. Maybe rent something or borrow something else to record. Snares. Now look, there are a lot of crappy snares out there, so you got to be careful. The most classic kind of versatile snares that are available are the Black Beauty snare. There's a lot of companies that make versions of the Black Beauty now, or a Ludwig Superphonic. These are metal snares, okay, guys? And the size, 14 inches across, standard size, about 6 inches deep. Some are 5.5. It's hard to go wrong with like a 14 by 6 metal snare. Okay, if you want to have a snare that's just your go-to studio snare, then get a Black Beauty, 14 by 6. Okay, if you have a shallower snare, you know, if it's only 4 inches deep or like really shallow, like 3 inches, you might get a little more snap and pop out of it, but it's not going to have that low-end punch and aggression that we usually want for rock and heavier music, right? On the other end, you can go deeper. I like deeper snares, so if you get like a 14 by 8 inch deep, that can be an awesome sound sometimes if you really want more low-end thud and body and punch. In terms of other snares, Tama Bell brass snares are awesome, very heavy, thick, and therefore very loud. So Tama Bell brass is it's a more expensive, it's kind of a high-end classic. That's what one of them sounds like right here. 14 by 6.5. Love that. Again, there's a lot of other companies that make kind of clones of the bell brass as well. So metal snare, 14 by 6. You can get 14 by 5, 5.5, or you can go up to 8 inches deep. Again, metal snares, those are going to be your best friend in the studio. Now for cymbal sizes, typically a drummer's going to have 2 crashes, right? One on the left and right. They might have a ride cymbal as well, and then sometimes a china. So generally, you want to use slightly smaller cymbals in the studio than what a lot of drummers will use live. Okay, sometimes drummers, they like their drums to be really loud at shows, right? So they get these big cymbals. But if you use smaller cymbals instead in the studio, you get a little more control over the cymbals. They're not too washy. They don't ring out as long. So you get more tightness, more control, and also more brightness out of the cymbal. So for example here, here's the 2 crashes, right? So this is an 18-inch. That's on the right side for a regular right-handed drummer. That's going to be the one he's going to be riding on, crashing on heavy sections and stuff, right? Then here, typically like a little bit smaller, 16-inch, a little higher pitched. Pretty classic cymbal sound there and cymbal setup. You want to kind of stick in that family. In general, yeah, something like an 18 to 19-inch on the right, smaller, brighter, 16-inch on the left. But sometimes you just have to listen, right? Like best case scenario, I really love it when drummers come in and they have more cymbal options. Like if they bring in 4 different crashes and we can listen to them all and we can pick the combo of the 2 that work best, because sometimes I'm surprised, right? Like sometimes I'll look at a cymbal and I'll be like, oh, that 18-inch, it's probably going to be tighter, more controlled than the 19. It's going to be brighter. But then we throw them up and it's actually the opposite is true, right? So you do have to kind of listen. So these sizes are kind of guidelines, but every cymbal is made differently. So ideally you have a few options. You can put them up in the studio, listen in the room, and choose the best combo. But again, try not to get something that is too dark and washy and is going to ring out forever. In terms of ride cymbals, pretty typical sizes there. 20 to 22-inch ride is totally fine. There's a 20-inch there. But again, just listen in the room, choose the best sounding cymbals and combos. And you want to be thinking about this ahead of time. And you want to check with the band. Hey, what do you guys have for drum kits? What are you guys bringing in? What are the sizes? Okay, you want to know that before they come into the studio, right? So you're not caught off guard. And that way, if they're like, oh, my kick is a 20 by 26 inch, so one of these super big tunnel kicks. You'd be like, let's get something else, right? You want to know that ahead of time. Otherwise, you end up getting stuck, right? So we will have time for questions at the end. If you guys have any questions about this, just save that. Right now, we're going to go ahead and move on to how to replace drum heads and how to tune them. So this is going to be a video that I'm going to queue up here, and then we'll come back on camera after that. So here we go, tuning drums. All right, so I always recommend replacing the drum heads with fresh heads before every session, and definitely do this kind of right before you're about to start, setting up mics and everything, or obviously when you're tuning the drums. So, lots of drummers like to put their heads on and work it in a little bit before they come in, which is okay in some scenarios. It depends, how important the project is, I guess. But I like to have fresh heads at the start of every session, just because it's going to give you a brighter sound, and it's just going to be easier to work with because you don't have to fight against, a head that's already stretched out or tuned incorrectly or anything like that. We kind of just start fresh and have more control over it. The only thing I'm not going to replace is the head on the kick drum. Sounds fine right now, and usually you don't have to do that. Like, that will last a long time. Tuning wise for the kick drum, it's one of those things that kind of depends on the drummer's feel because, for example, in this song, there's lots of double kick and everything. So the action of the beater against the head is important, and just their feel. So I'm not going to mess with that because it's sounding good already. Once we get the mic on, if we need to adjust the tuning, we can do that. If you want a tip for kick drum sounds, a really easy thing to do is often if you just loosen up both heads, so the beater head and the resonant head, just loosen them up almost to the point where the lugs are moving, like they're barely hanging on there, and then just tighten it a little bit. That's going to give you a really slappy sound and not too much resonance, especially if you have some blankets or pillows touching the heads inside there. So that's my tip for kick drum tuning. Again, it kind of depends on the feel, so you don't want to mess up the drummer too much, but generally the looser you have those heads, you're going to get more of a slappy sound
and less resonance. So we'll just start replacing the heads on the toms and snare. I usually like to start with the toms, so we'll grab the rack tom here, bring it over. I think it's good to bring it over away from the kit, just so as you're hitting it and getting sounds, it's not, you're not having as much resonance with everything else. So we'll take off the top head here, and then we'll work on the bottom head first. So that's also a good opportunity to tune the bottom head when there's no top head on it. All right, so with the top head off, we can make sure that our bottom head is in tune here. So usually for toms, for, again, kind of a deeper, punchier, thuddy sound without a ton of ringing, which is usually what we want for like a rock or a heavy song like this. What I find usually works is having the bottom head tuned up fairly high and the top head tuned fairly loose. So you get a lot of that punch from the top head, and that just keeps it from resonating too much. If you wanted more of a resonant or ringing sound from the toms, then you would try to tune the top and bottom more or less the same or closer to each other. So we'll see kind of how this is sounding. Tuned pretty low actually, so I'm actually going to tighten that up a little bit. And we're going to try to just find a range where, just with the resonant head hitting it lightly, where it just kind of resonates in a nice way. And that's going to be kind of different depending on the size of the tom. So it's not bad. It's ringing out nicely there. It sounds like that's pretty good, in a fairly good range. So now we'll just start seeing, just basic tip for tuning drums is you just want to tap around all the lugs and just listen for the pitch, and just make sure that all the way around you've got a similar pitch, or as close as you can get, really. So we got this lug higher than this one. Bring that up. See if we can we'll actually bring it down a little bit. Okay, that's resonating okay, I think. A lot of this stuff is just, trial and error. You just try, see how it sounds good. Tighter, if not, go back the other way. That's pretty much my approach there. So we'll grab a top head for this tom. Again, a lot of this comes down to personal preference. I really like these Remo clear pinstripes for toms. I find you get a pretty bright attack out of them. So, and the pinstripe helps with the resonance, helps kind of mute the ringing of the tom a little bit, which I like as well. So we'll throw that on and see what we can get. Getting a little more tone out of it now. We'll keep going. Starting to sound more like a tom now, but we're still getting lots of nasty ringing here. In this case, you can kind of tap around and see which of the lugs are looser and contributing to that kind of nasty buzz on the ring out. That sounded pretty good so far. It's got a lot of punch to it. We're getting a lot of resonance for sure, so we'll see what we can do about that. I'm not minding the tone of it here, it's just ringing quite a bit, so we'll try loosening up a bit. It's a little better. I'll actually try bringing this up to see if we can cut some of the resonance here. So I'm bringing up the bottom head. So, like I said, trial and error, that was worse, so we'll bring it back down. This is pretty much the process. It's just trying things until we get a sound we're pretty happy with. At that point, we can put it under the mic and kind of go from there. Okay, we're getting lots of ring. We might have to moon gel it. I'm going to throw it back on the tom, and we can, or on the tom stand, and we can keep adjusting it from there. And we'll also kind of get the floor tom going as well, just so we can kind of get the play between the two toms as well. All right, so now we've got it on the stand here. It's sounding a little less resonant. It's a lot more tight and punchy. I've just been bringing it up a little bit, so we still maintain that smack, but we start to hear more of a tone from the tom, because we don't want it to be just totally dead. You want a bit of a tone there. So we're pretty close, I think. I'll try to bring it up a little bit, see if we can get a little more tone out of it. I think we'll stop there for now, and then once we throw the mic on, we'll be able to have a better idea of what it's actually sounding like under the mic. But from where I'm standing right here, I'm okay to roll with that for now. So we'll move on to the floor tom. All right, so we've got the top head off of the floor tom now. So we'll do the same thing. We'll just check out the bottom head, make sure we're in a good ballpark here. So this is tuned down pretty low, actually, which might be cool. We'll just make sure all these lugs are evenly tuned here. Okay, I'm just gonna go with that. This is how the drummer's head, the bottom head for this tom, so I'm gonna try and trust that a little bit and then put the top head on and we'll see where we're at. So again, we're using the same Remo pinstripe head for the floor tom as well. So we've got this head on nice and loose here, just finger tightened. Sometimes you can just kind of push on the center of the head a little bit just to stretch it out and help it get seated into the drum a little bit. And then we'll just start doing the same thing, just going up bit by bit until we get a sound we like. So again, similar to the rack tom, we got good smack on it. Just a matter of finding a good balance for the resonance as well. Hard to say until we get under the mic. We might be in an okay range there. It's pretty punchy, still got some low end. We're gonna have to see kind of how it sounds with the drummer playing it. Usually I'd even try to get a bit lower than this, even to get a little more smack out of it. But then there's a trade-off of, you can get a nasty resonance that way too. So we'll try to loosen up a little bit, see what we can get. And then we'll see if we need to, we can always dampen with moon gels or tape or something. All right, let's bring it over. It's not bad. Like I said, very smacky, not a whole lot of ring or resonance or too much tone coming through, but right under a mic like that, that's what we want, especially for a heavy rock sound. You almost want that more slightly dead-end, just punchy smack out of the toms. That's what I'm going for. That's why I've tuned it like this. So we're going to do the same thing on the snare and replace the snare head here. I've got an Evans HG Dry snare head, which the drummer of this band, he prefers the Evans snare head, so we're going with that. Other options that I've used before in the past that work well are our Remo coated controlled sound with the dot in the middle. Those can help give a more focused sound and have less ring. But for this session, we're using this Evans HG Dry, so we'll throw that on. And snare tuning tips, it's really just experimentation. Kind of in general, you want to pretty much crank up both the top and bottom heads pretty tight. Sometimes the bottom head tuned a little lower can work well, but pretty much it's just a matter of getting the head nice and tight and just making sure around all the lugs we've got a pretty consistent tuning. So we'll just do that and see what we get. Basically trying to get like a decent low-end thud out of it, but obviously still lots of high-end attack and crack. There's going to be some resonance, and I've kind of learned over the years not to deaden that too much. We might try to put some tape on there. Moon gels work really well around the edge. If you can kind of hear this, you can hear the sustain. Now if you put your fingers near the edge of the head here, really cuts it off. So that's what a moon gel or just a piece of tape will help with that if you're finding there's too much ring. But I was going to say, over the years, I found that I used to cut too much of the ring out of the snare. to the point where I get to mix time and I just have this really short sound for the snare. You know, it's just the crack and the attack and no body and sustain to it, which makes it kind of hard to have the snare be heard and have character in the mix. So these days I try to find the balance. You know, obviously we don't want a nasty ring that doesn't sound good in the mic, but I found that in the end, you know, once you get all the layers in, it's kind of nice to have some ring on the snare to have that character, and that's going to allow you to just craft a snare tone in the mix that's gonna be heard and it's gonna have character. Starting to pop a little more. Just making sure there's no spots where it's jumping out as being out of tune with the rest of the head. We'll see how that's sounding with the kit as a whole. It's popping pretty good. We've got some nice body out there. So at this point, we've kind of got the drums basically tuned up. So we'll bring the drummer in, we'll have him play. I'll kind of stand in the room, just listen to how the kit sounds, and we'll do maybe a few final tweaks, and then we'll start throwing up mics. All right, so this is Chris, the drummer of the band. I'm gonna get him to just play the whole kit, and I'm gonna stand in the room and listen to it before we start throwing mics on, just so we can make sure that we're happy with just how the kit sounds in the room. We'll just get him to play through a section of the song. I'll kind of move around the room, listen, and if anything needs to be changed, like tuning-wise or whatever, we'll do that. Go for it. The kick is almost a little bit like muddy, whether that's like maybe loosening the head or, I don't want to mess up your feel too much, but. Yeah, just if we could hear like more smack almost. All right, so we just adjusted the kick a bit to get a little more slap and pointed attack out of it. Just gonna hear like snare and toms again, and then the whole kit together, and see if we're good to start setting up mics here. So just kind of play a bit, Chris. All right, pretty happy with that. So we'll start setting up mics now, and then we'll see how it sounds on the other side.
Cool. All right, guys. So don't worry, you're going to actually hear what those sound like under, you know, the actual mics that we used to record, right? In the next session, you're going to hear what these tracks actually sound like, because I know with the mic on the camera, it's a little bit hard to hear exactly what I'm hearing in the room as I'm tuning that, but trust the process. Okay, I'm going to give you guys a quick recap of everything you just saw, all right? So, by the way, there's this drum tracking cheat sheet that's in your members area. So when you purchase this, you got like a login, right, to where you got all the links for this. There's a cheat sheet download on that right side, and it's basically got a recap of everything that you're going to learn here. So as you can see on this cheat sheet, I'll just run through quick high-level tips from what you got, okay? So number one, start fresh with new heads, okay? Don't let the drummer bring in used, beat-up drum heads. Okay, just don't. Just start fresh. For kick drum, for tuning the kick drum, rule of thumb is both heads, the beater and the resonant head, both of them, just tune them really loose. Okay, I like to go literally just finger tighten and then grab the drum key and just like a little bit, just enough so that the lugs are not like shaking when he hits the drum, right? So really loose on that kick. That's going to give you really tight, slappy, lots of attack, and it's not going to be too loud in the room, and it's not going to be like really resonant and ringing that's going to mess up all your other tracks, okay? So that's what you do for kick. For snare, pretty simple, both bottom and top head pretty tight. Just start with the bottom head pretty tight, and then just start cranking up the top head and just hit it, you know, every turn until you get it into a spot where it's just popping, just kind of popping and giving you a nice crack and attack and maybe a nice sustain. Make sure all the lugs are equal pitch all around the outside. Then for toms are super easy, guys. The bottom head, tune it higher. The top head, kind of like the kick drum, as loose as possible. Okay, for toms. For toms, it's like my struggle is like I keep wanting to have it tuned lower and looser, but you get that kind of nasty, kind of rattly buzz on the head, right? So basically, again, it's like kick drum. I start with it, just finger tighten all the way around the tom, and then use the drum key and just tune it up a little bit at a time until I get rid of the buzz and resonance, but still have a nice deep kind of thud with a lot of bright attack. It's really, really nice for toms, like tons of attack, plenty bright. And I like those clear heads for toms. Those are going to be brighter as well. And then the key is just to listen in the studio, right? You'll notice how I didn't start putting mics on the kit there until after I was done tuning and heard the drummer play in the room, because you can catch some problems. Like in that example, I caught that, the drum, or the kick drum, just, it sounded kind of muddy. It was mostly like low mid focused, right? I wanted to hear more smack and attack. And so we loosened the beater head even more. And then that got it more into the ballpark, right? So that's the quick recap. And again, that's all in the cheat sheet for you guys. And when it comes to choosing drums, drum heads, tuning them, you really got to have confidence as the producer in charge, because you are the final line of defense who can say, no, this is not acceptable. We need better. All right, that's your job. Okay, so you cannot accept garbage or mediocrity. All right. A couple stories from my experience with bands in the studio. I'd have guys bringing in like broken cymbals, and like they would book with me and pay a deposit, and I'd send them documents that have like an overview. I'd ask them like, okay, what sizes of drums and cymbals are you bringing in? Okay, make sure your cymbals are in good shape. These are the different drum heads to get or whatever. So yeah, I've had a couple guys, they bring in cymbals and they're broken cymbals. And we're setting up the drum kit and putting the cymbals on. I'm like, oh, hey, dude, like there's a crack. There's like a 1-inch crack here in the cymbal. You see that? He's like, oh, yeah. We just got that crack like a week ago, and still sounds good though. So, I couldn't afford a new one. So, I figured we just have to use that one. It still sounds fine. And it's like, I hit the cymbal. It's like, it doesn't sound fine. And we're about to record drums for 2 days, and that thing is only going to get bigger and bigger, and it's going to sound worse and worse. Like, we're not using this. Like, here's the address to the music store. Go and get a new cymbal. And they would, right? So you can't accept that kind of stuff. And also with drum heads, I would always tell bands, get this type of drum head, and then don't put them on before you come into the studio. Okay, don't work into the drum heads. Don't put them on. Just bring in the package of drum heads to the studio, and we will put them on. Lo and behold, most people follow that direction. But lo and behold, sometimes they come in and they've got completely other drum heads. Like one guy brought in like these black like rubber drum head. Oh, they sounded terrible. I was like, dude, like this is not what I asked for. It's like you're only going to be in the studio recording drums with me for a couple days. Like, can you just use a different drum head, for the sake of the recording? Like all your other shows, you can use whatever drum head you want. I could care less. But like for recording, this is what's going to work, right? Other guys would come in and, I'd be like, okay, where's the drum heads? Let's put the drum heads on. He's like, oh, I already put them on. Put them on like 2 weeks ago. I just wanted to get them settled in and seated in the drum and just like work them in a little bit because I think it sounds better. It's like, dude, that's not what I asked. Like, here's the address to the music store. Go and get new heads, right? So that really is your job, and that is how you hold up what I call the gold standard. Okay, what's that saying? Is that like you never rise to the heights that you're hoping for. You always sink to the floor of what you will accept. And so you've got to raise that floor of what is acceptable to you. Okay, and I know this takes a little bit of time to like get confidence with tuning drums and with tracking drums, but over time you're going to, again, follow this formula. It is going to give you confidence. Next time you track drums, you're going to go and you're going to tune them like this. You're going to tune the kick that way, the toms that way, the snare that way. And you're like, oh, sounds better, right? Trust the process. And then as you hear the results of the process, you start to get more confident, which then gives you more authority and just confidence in your interactions with people to be like, even if they're pushing back, like, no, man, like I really like these other drum heads. It's like, listen, man, I understand that. That's totally, I don't care what you use live. That's great. Like, trust me, I've got a lot of experience here in the studio. Using these heads instead is going to be better. And then also once you learn how to tune, like a lot of drummers, it's surprising, even in good bands, a lot of drummers, they don't really know how to tune their drums. or they act like they do, but they really don't have confidence. Like I've had drummers in there who like, they're all tatted up, they're big guys, like kind of intimidating, right? And they start tuning their drums or whatever, and like they're messing around, and like I'll head in there and be like, okay, like it's all right. Like, do you mind if I jump in there and just tweak the tuning a bit? Oh man, yes, thank you so much. Like I'm kind of just guessing, right? Like everyone is so insecure, like under the surface. Even guys that they seem like really, really serious and they know exactly what they're doing. Let me give you a tip, guys. When you're working with musicians, the more they're resisting you, or the more they're trying to act like they have to be the ones to like do everything, the more they're probably are insecure and don't really know what they're doing, and they're trying to cover that up, right? And so again, you've got to have the confidence to jump in there and help and make it better, right? So on most of the records I've done, like I'm the one who's tuning the drums when the drummer doesn't care, because they don't really know what they're doing either, right? And they're actually trying to learn from me. So I want you guys to be able to step into that position. So with that said, guys, let's go to Q&A for 5-10 minutes here, and then we'll break before the next session, okay? So type in the chat your questions here. Let me see if I missed anything. Okay. Johan says, do you tune your snare so that the ring is in tune with the key of the song? And how do you dampen the kick? No, I don't. I don't tune any of the drums to the key of the song. It's not really something I've seen any of the pro engineers that I kind of respect and have learned from. They never said anything about that. And it's just hard. Like you're going to spend a lot of time trying to figure that out. And for what? Like, do you really hear that in the mix? Like in a dense rock mix? Like you just want punch, right? And so no, like I've never had, especially snare, I've never had the experience where the ring, even if there is a lot of ring on the snare, I haven't really had the experience where the ring is like a pitch that's fighting with the song. Like it just doesn't really happen. And if it does, you probably will notice very quickly, and you can adjust that. But no, it's not something that I pursue. I don't measure the pitch of the snare or toms or anything like that. In terms of dampening the kick, so a pillow inside, make sure that it's touching both heads. That's the key, okay? So if you have a pillow, put it long ways and have part of it like just kind of, you guys see my hands here. So if the two heads are here, right? Let's say the beater head, all right, let's do this side. This side is the beater head, right? You want the pillow laying down here and then just flipping up a little bit and just touching like, maybe 3 to 6 inches of that head. And then on the other side, same thing, like it's just flipped up and touching like the bottom 3 to 6 inches of the head there. You don't really need to stuff it super full or anything, but just having something just soft, a blanket, a coat, a sweater, a pillow, just make sure it's on both heads, right? And then also for kick drum heads, a lot of them come with like the pads, right, that you put in front of the beater. Those little kick pads work really well for more attack and tightness on the punch too. All right, Yanal is asking, what is a good time to change the reso head? Typically, you'll just kind of look at it and see, like, if it looks really beat up, if it looks like people have been hitting it and playing on it and there's dents in it, or it just looks super old and scratchy, like lots of wear and tear, then it's probably time to change it. But they can last a fairly long time. Is there a particular beater that you prefer? I'm assuming you mean like plastic, whatever. Yeah, like usually the plastic ones, depends on the genre, right? If it's like a straight up rock, like sometimes a felt beater with like a kick pad on, with it tuned this way, is fine. There's enough attack there. If it's something that's more technical, aggressive, heavier metal, then yeah, having it flipped around to the plastic side often works well. What about a hi-hat size? Yeah, I didn't really touch that because, again, hi-hat sizes are pretty standard. And I don't know, it's just not like, who really cares about the hi-hat sound, Like, has anyone ever listened to it? Like, personally, I've never, ever, in all of my music listening life, even as a producer and engineer, I've never listened to a record and been like, oh, I hate that hi-hat sound. Or like, oh, I love that hi-hat sound. So it's pretty much like whatever they bring in is fine. In all the years of recording bands, I cannot remember a time where the drummer brought in hi-hats that sounded so bad that I was like, oh, we need to get different hi-hats. Like, it's just never happened. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Most hi-hats are just fine. How would you go about the snare bottom heads? Yeah, you just tune it up pretty tight, same as the toms. You want to have those tuned up pretty tight, make sure the tension is equal on all the lugs, and then move on to the top head there. Oh, you mean with the chains? Yeah, the chains. Yeah, that one, I didn't touch it in the video. You have to kind of experiment, but generally you want them pretty tight, right? You just kind of have to, I guess if you're starting from scratch, you could loosen it all the way off, and then hit the drum, and then start tightening it bit by bit, flip it off, tighten, flip it on, tighten it, and you want to get, I guess, the desired amount of that snare metallic rattle that you want, right? Because I've had some songs where, you know, they're really, sometimes if you have like a deeply tuned snare and you want like a thuddy sound, you kind of want that extra sizzle and length. Like you want the bottom snares to be like, you want them to last a little bit, right? And so you can have them a little looser, and you got to find that sweet spot. Generally, though, for a standard snare sound, you want them like fairly tight, so to the point where you flip them on and you hit the drum, you don't hear like the snares rattling beyond the hit, right? So yeah, generally just start with it off and just start tighter, 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 hitting it every time until that rattle goes away, and you should be good there. Ever use a tension tuner? Yeah, I've tried like I don't know what you mean by tension tune. Like a drum dial. Like I've used the drum dials and stuff. They're okay. They can help you kind of get to the end result a little quicker, but you don't need them. Like you can just tune by ear, just tapping around the way you saw there. Shannon, do you ever take off the front kick head? Yeah, occasionally. Typically that's only if the drummer, or only if the head doesn't have a hole in it for the mic, right? Then yeah, I'll take it off. You have to. And in that case, I sometimes will put a blanket over top just to help with the bleed a little bit, but you don't always need to do that. But if possible, I like to have the resonant head on, because it does add more low end oomph and punch. And even though your mic is pointing at the beater head, you still are gonna hear that and pick that up. So preferably it's on, but yes, it can be off. Ben, do you retune between songs? Yeah, good question. Yes, definitely. So after we finish a song, I'll go in there and just kind of, or sometimes if I think it's still sounding good, I'll stay in the control room, but ask the drummer, can you just hit every drum like individually for me, and I'll listen and see if something sounds off, or I'll hop in the room more often than not and get behind the kit and just hit everything again. Often the snare for new head, you'll have to like tune that up in between songs, because it'll kind of detune a little bit. Getting those lug locks around the edge can help that. But yeah, you definitely want to check in between songs. That's a good point. Okay, Jeff's saying if the drums have a ton of 30-second note quads, technical stuff, like whatever, is it okay to use a sample pad and a live kick? Yeah, it's okay for sure. And that's starting with the end in mind, right? For me, the question of whether we're using a sample pad and just getting rid of the kick, that's more about the skill of the drummer. So hopefully in advance, I get an idea, even as they're setting up and practicing or whatever. If I'm like, okay, there's a ton of double kick in these songs, and this guy's not tight enough to pull this off, then for sure we would look at taking the kick away, putting a sample in, or I'm just trying to deaden the kick and make it quiet as possible. So that's just kind of a creative choice, and also a choice that depends on the quality of the drummer themselves. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that kind of stuff in the third session today. Riley says, when you call a session, nude heads every day or every song? Yeah, good question too. Not every song for drums. Typically, I'd say you can, with the new heads, you could track like about 5-6 songs on them. That should be fine. That will probably take you 2 to 3 days to track. Yeah, probably 2 days you get 6 songs done. That's typically the limit. So if I'm doing a full-length record where we're tracking more than that at once, then yeah, we'll change up the snare and tom heads like halfway through. The kick head, you're usually fine. But yeah, probably 5 or 6 songs is probably the limit of what you're looking at. But again, it depends on the drummer, because if the drummer's just like one taking everything and not playing very much, you could probably get a little more mileage out of the heads. But yeah, typically we'll end up, at least the snare head will end up changing a couple times for a full-length record. What about kick drum head? Yeah, again, not super picky. Just get one of the kick heads, again, with like the stripe around the edge. That helps dampen the resonance, and then something that comes with the kick pad, like the power patch or whatever that you put where the beater hits. Those are really good there. But I've used a wide variety of kick heads. I don't really prescribe a certain kind there. Would a brass snare be the best option for punchy drums? Brass snares are like loud and aggressive and mid-rangey. So very common in rock for sure. You know, like that Nirvana Nevermind sound, like, you know, that's a classic, like kind of brass loud snare. So yeah, definitely brass snares are awesome. Love them, but really kind of any kind of metal snare works as well. All right, Pig Pretty says, should you use EQ cheat sheet on drum samples, or are they mix ready? Yeah, you can definitely use EQ on them. I'm often EQing drum samples to fit in the mix. Anthony, would you recommend changing all bottom heads on snare and toms? No, typically you don't have to, but again, take a look at them. If it looks like the guy's been hitting them with sticks and they're dented and like all scratched up and look really worn, then yeah, you want to change them, but generally you're okay. Mr. Spoon, when listening to drums in the room, did you use earplugs? Nope. Yeah, you can't judge the sound of the kit if you're using earplugs. So you just don't want to be in there too long, right? But if you're just in the room listening to the drum kit for like a minute, it's gonna be okay. I got the Benny Grab 13-inch wood snare. Would I be able to get a good punch out of it? Yeah, you definitely can get a good punch. You'll just find that you won't get as much of like that top end kind of aggressive crack and like sizzle and brightness. It's a little hard to get that out of most wood snares. So yeah, you might want to experiment. Like go rent a Black Beauty and just test it side by side and hear the differences and see, like, you know, you might want to swap that out. Peter, is it a good way to record cymbals separately from the shells and other takes? I heard about it recently, but I haven't tried it. I would avoid that unless you are like becoming a master at this, all right? And you've got a really, really, really good drummer, because most drummers are going to really struggle with that. I haven't personally tried that. I've talked to a lot of producers who have tried. Some of them say they love it. I was just talking to Nolly the other week, actually. He was doing some stuff with Architects, and he said they were doing that on this session, and he really liked it. But again, you've got to have a really good drummer, and you've got to be a really good engineer to be able to put those together and do the editing properly to, like, you know, make it still sound like he's playing as one kit. So I would just avoid that. Like, to me, get this down first. Get a normal drum recording down. Get it so that you are an expert and you pull it off every time and it always sounds great. You know exactly what you're doing. Then maybe you can experiment with some of that stuff. But you don't want to, like, you know, you don't want to try and improvise solos on guitar when you can't really even play chords, right? So get the basics down first. Do you use cymbals, sim pads, or tape in the bell to tame a cymbal, for instance? No, I've never used that. I don't think you need to do that. Again, that's like, let's try and get the right cymbal sounds without having to do that. Ever used totally different kick and snare for different parts of songs? Example, smaller kick and snare versus. No, I've never done that. I've certainly used different drums. Mostly the snare is what we change out, but different drums for different songs on a record. But different parts of songs, that's getting very detailed. Yeah, I haven't really done that. Again, you want to try to simplify as much as possible. Like, try to get the result in the least amount of steps as you can. You don't want to be overcomplicating too much. Again, if you're a master and you're working with great artists on really important records and you've got tons of budget and time to do that kind of thing, then by all means. But I don't think that's something you really need to worry about for the most part. How tight has to be the front kick? Yeah, I already discussed that. Both heads of the kick drum as loose as possible. All right, Pat, and you mentioned the alignment of the bottom and top mics on the old picture. How important is the alignment and what's your approach to that? Yeah, so in the next session, guys, we're going to walk through the entire miking approach, so you'll see that. But yeah, you want the top and bottom snare mics to be like vertically aligned. You don't want one off to the side. Do you phase align all the tracks? Example, align everything to a snare hit, overhit? No, I don't do that. Every time I've tried to do that, it sounds really weird to me. You know, I don't know. It's just like, I know some people swear by it, but it sounds weird to me. It sounds unnatural. I don't know exactly why it is. I think there's something to do with, like, our brains process sound the same way, right? So if you picture an actual drum kit, let's say you're standing in front of a drum kit 10 feet away. Well, like the kick is going to be a foot closer to you than like the snare is. And then the tom is like also a little bit distant. And so all these sounds are like hitting us at slightly different times, right? And so when we line everything up on top of each other, it's like a bit of an unnatural sound. Then again, on a recording, you've got all the close mics anyway. So I get that there's like some debate here. I'm just saying in my experience, I have never done it. So if you listen to any of the drums that I've done, I've never done that. Anytime I've tried, it sounds a little bit goofy and weird. So you don't have to do that. And remember, like long before people had the ability to do that in DAWs, they were recording drums to tape and certainly not doing that. Okay. And so a lot of the drum sound that we're chasing after that we've grown up loving has not been aligned like that. And so I definitely do not see that as a necessary step to do. Okay, guys. So if that's all the questions that we have for the first session about tuning and heads and all that, I think we'll take a break here. So the next session is in just under 2 hours at 12 p.m. Eastern. So definitely make sure to be back here. We're going to be talking about the miking strategy, right? Exactly what mics to use, where to put them, and we'll walk through all that. We'll do some more Q&A, and then you can actually hear what these tracks sound like. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back for session 2. We're going to talk about a foolproof miking strategy for rock and metal drums. I'm going to show you exactly how to mic up a kit. Before we dive into that, those of you who are at session 1, hopefully most of you, I want you to type in the chat right now. What were your main takeaways from the first session this morning? Anything new that you learned that you didn't know before? Anything surprise you about my approach? Anything different than what you have been doing in the past? Please type it in the comment box there. I want to know what are your big takeaways or any aha moments from the first session. Yes, absolutely. Source matters, right? John says, I am no longer terrified by the idea that I can tune drums myself. Amazing. Perfect. You need that kind of confidence, and it's really not that hard. Sawyer says, surprised with how low the drums are tuned. Yeah. That's how you get the smack, right? Because the tighter the head is, the tighter the drum head is, when you hit it, it's going to be more of like a bing, as opposed to like, think of a tom head that's tuned really loose. It's just like, you get that smack, right? Peter, hi-hat doesn't matter. Yeah, that's a good takeaway, eh? Same with the China. I didn't give any China sizes because every China sounds different. They all sound wacky. So, China's a China. Bird says, didn't know how to tune drums before. Awesome. Guys, this formula, I'm telling you, I've been tuning drums that exact way with that exact framework for since 2010-ish, I guess. So well over 20 years. I still don't change it when I go into the studio now. It's going to work. All right, Anthony says, the importance of selecting the right cymbals and drums. Interesting to learn tuning tips. Kick drum tuning. Metal snare for recording. Tuning top head tom so low. It's okay to jump in and help musicians. Yes, absolutely. You have to. That's the difference between someone who, has like a typical home studio, amateur studio, and maybe they charge $200-300 a song. Band comes in, they just record them. Versus someone who's really a pro and is charging thousands per song. It's like they're right in there with the artist. They're working on the song. They're working on the arrangement. They're helping them figure out performance issues, set up instruments, all that stuff, right? That's the difference. Jade says, don't overcomplicate it. Tune the drums with new heads, sizes. Tips for removing snare drum buzz from the toms. Yeah, that sometimes happens. Typically, it's pretty low level, right? And like, think about when a drummer's like playing hard on toms. Yeah, sometimes the bottom snare buzzes a little bit. Now, sometimes it can be super crazy, and you just need to like change something about the tom tuning, or like change the resonance of the bottom head, tune it higher or something, or the snare. Maybe you just need to change the tuning or loosen the bottom snares. But generally, like, it's still gonna buzz a little bit, but like in the context of a drummer playing the whole kit and doing a tom fill or playing tom part really loud, like that snare buzz is not really gonna matter 98% of the time. It's only if it's really crazy, like then something is resonating and you just need to change the pitch one way or the other. Drum tuning is different live versus studio. I don't know about that. I would probably still tune them the same, unless maybe you weren't miking them. Then yeah, you might want the kick to be tuned in a way that makes it louder. But everything else, well, yeah, maybe I can see that for the toms if they're not mic'd. If it's not mic'd, I can see you wanting a little more resonance out of the drums live. Yeah, John says he if you wanted that wet slap on the kick, it was due to making it looser. I was backwards on that. Yeah, next time you try that, man, it's gonna be like, wow, that's crazy. Yeah, that is the secret there. Scale of Alkin says, appreciate the 0% mumbo jumbo, getting the best of what you have and not ranting about fancy snare. Yeah. There you go. So this session, I'm going to show you guys exactly how to mic up a drum kit. And this mic setup is one that you can use every single time with every single project. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Okay, so I'm going to queue up a video that's going to show you how I'm setting up mics on a kit in real time. Really quick before we get in there, just so you know what to watch out for. Okay, the types of mics we're going to use on the kit. Okay, number one, for shells, so kick, snare, toms. The shells, dynamic mics. Okay, you want to use dynamic mics. For kick, my favorite's the D112, the AKG. Snare, top and bottom, SM57, totally fine. For toms, a lot of people like 421s. I don't love them. My favorite tom mics are these little E604s. They have like clips that you can use live, or you can put them on a stand. Man, I've tried like all the tom mics, and those are my favorite. They're easy to position, and they're cheap. So Sennheiser E604s, those are my favorite. But really, any dynamic mic is going to work for drum shells. For overheads, small diaphragm condensers. Okay, also some people call them pencil mics. It's the skinny condenser mics, right? My favorites are AKG 451s, Neumann KM184s or 84s, Shure SM81, Rode NT, I think it's NT5, right? Those are the small ones. Just any small diaphragm condenser mic. Obviously, generally the higher the price, you're going to get a cleaner sound. It's going to be a better quality mic. But even like the Rodes and the Shures, you know, they do the job just fine. And then for room mics, I like large diaphragm condensers. By the way, we can talk about this later in the Q&A at the end of this session. You know, guys might be wondering, well, what about ribbons? What about LDCs for overheads? Like, we'll talk about that, but just letting you know what to look out for in this miking video. Dynamics for shells, small diaphragm condensers for cymbals, large diaphragms for rooms. And really the importance is like, it's not necessarily the specific mic, you know, whether it's you're using the D112 for the kick or whether you're using 421 or whatever. The more important thing is that you're in that family of mic, but the positioning, right? The positioning really, really matters, especially how you use mic rejection and all that stuff. So with all that said, guys, that's the kind of really big picture overview. Now let's dive in and get specific, and we'll show you how to mic up a drum kit. Here we go.
All right, so we'll just start putting the mics on the kit, and I'll walk through kind of each piece of the kit. So starting with the kick, the D112 here is one of my favorite kick mics. I've tried a lot, and I just find that this gives me the most flexibility later on. It can take EQ really well, so I can kind of shape it after the fact as much as I want. Whereas some of the other mics, which might be good for metal, like the Audix D6, I believe, sounds a little more modern and punchy kind of right off the mic. It's got a lot of top end and it's very scooped already, but I find that in the mix it kind of boxes you in a little bit. But the D112 is my go-to kick mic. So for placement, usually I'm going inside the kick drum, and we'll try to get it basically towards the center of the kick, so maybe a little bit more towards this side than the beater head. But kind of somewhere, yeah, around the middle and a little bit back, and then just pointing slightly off center to where the beater hits the head. So usually kind of right where this hole is really. So it's pointing that way at the beater, but just a little bit off center. So let's see if we can get it in here. Make sure the stand is not touching the head at all. And then also vertically too, make sure you're pretty much in the center of the kick drum here. Now, once you actually hear it coming through the mic in the control room, if it's lacking low end, you can pull it back a little bit, or if you need more kind of attack and less kind of woolly, woofy low end, you can move it more in towards the beater head as well. So that's looking pretty good. If you come around to this side, take a look. All right, so that's looking pretty good right there. Okay, next we'll go for the snare. So we're using classic go-to snare mics, SM57s on the top and bottom. You can try other mics, Beyerdynamic makes some, or Audix mics, but really like the studio standard is SM57s for snare. They can take loud volume, they can take abuse if the drummer hits them, so it's been my go-to snare mic for a while. I would definitely recommend just going with 57s on the top and bottom. So when I'm placing the snare mic, the first thing I'm thinking about is the pattern of the mic. So remember, cardioid mic, it's picking up in front of it and it's rejecting to the back. So I'm going to try to use that to my advantage as much as I can. You can see we've got the hi-hats and cymbals over here. So I'm going to have the back of the mic more or less pointing in between those cymbals so I can kind of try to reject as much of that sound as I can. And of course have it pointing away from the cymbals so we get the least amount of bleed possible here. It's impossible to eliminate it, but we want to try and position the mic wisely to make the most of it. Now in terms of where the mic is pointing, there's a lot of different opinions. Some guys like to shoot it more across the top of the head, like that. That's a little high, but kind of like that. Or for me, I like to get more of a, I just try to like to aim it at the center where he's going to actually be hitting the snare drum, and I find that that gives me just a punchy sound, and I try to bring it in probably a little more than this. Bring it in maybe an inch over top of the rim, just so that we're not getting too much of the direct sound from here where the snare is ringing. I want to be more or less pointing and capturing the actual impact of where he's hitting the snare drum. Okay, so we've got it about an inch over the rim here, pointing at the center. That should be a good starting point there. So for the bottom snare mic, we want to more or less mirror what we have on top here. So I'm going to bring this in close, try to find a spot. It'll be tricky with the stand sometimes just to fit it in. So I'm looking at, where on the drum the top mic is pointed here. I'm just trying to mirror that. So with the bottom mic, I like to go a bit farther away, so a few inches like that. We'll see how it sounds. If I'm getting too much, bleed other than the snare drum, I'll get it a bit closer. But I find if you get the mic up too much in the snares there, it just starts to sound a little too nasty. So usually back it off a little bit, somewhere around there. There you go, and on a bit of an angle towards the center of the drum. Okay, so for the toms, I'm using Beyerdynamic M201s. I actually have not used these tom mics before, but just in the studio we're at, just the mic selection, I'm just, trying to find, something new. So I'm gonna try these out, see how they sound. We might switch them out afterwards. We've got 421s here, which are also a classic tom mic. My personal preference is I've never really loved them. I used to use Sennheiser E604s in my studio, really small dynamic mics and not expensive either. And I find I liked those, more than almost any other mic I tried on toms. So that's a quick suggestion for you, but it's your own preference. Lots of guys like the 421s. I'm gonna try out these M201s. These are dynamic mics, by the way. Kind of similar to a 57, it's just the long body, just kind of pointing at the center of the tom here. Again, like the snare, kind of an inch over top of it. So same mic on the floor tom over here. I'm going to sneak it in between all of these cymbals here, and that's going to help me reject some of the bleed. And it's going to be out of the way. The cymbal's not going to be moving and hitting it. So same as the rack tom, just peeking over the rim about an inch or so. And both for the rack tom and this one, I'm about 2 inches above the head too, and I'm pointing at the middle where he's going to hit. And sometimes, just to look at it from different angles, when I come around to the front of the kit, I can see more clearly where it is, and just kind of look at it from different sides to make sure you've got the angles and the direction pointed the right way. Try to come up a little higher on it just so we can aim at the middle. All right, that should be good. All right, for overheads, I'm using Neumann KM84. So these are small diaphragm pencil mics. I personally prefer small diaphragm condensers for overheads. I find they give me a really focused, more directional sound as opposed to using a large diaphragm condenser like U87s or 414s or something like that. I find that those are a little bit less defined, whereas these give me a really tight sound. Other options would be AKG 451s are some of my favorites, or the Shure SM81 are also good on cymbals. So when I'm miking cymbals, I want to mic them fairly close because I want it to be as much capturing the cymbals as possible, more so than the whole kit. So my strategy here is not to capture the whole kit and get a good whole kit sound with these mics. These are more so like cymbal mics. So I'm not going to have them too high above. I'm going to see how close I can get. These are pretty big cymbals, so we might have to have them up a little higher, but you want to get fairly close, directional, so that in the mix you're really focused on your cymbal track. And then I'll use the room mics instead of the overheads to get more of the whole kit picture. And for positioning, I find you get a sweeter sound if you're kind of aiming off of the edge of the cymbal. So, don't put it right in the middle over top of here. I mean, even if you just hit a cymbal in the middle, it doesn't sound that good. It's kind of honky. Over at the edge, you get more of a brighter sound. So we're going to kind of aim right at, basically at the edge of the cymbal here. So check that from other angles here. So again, if you draw a line here, kind of aiming right about there. And I've got a slight angle backwards because again, I'm trying to capture just the cymbals here. I'm not trying to capture the snare. So that's why I've got it, again, aimed at the edge and just actually slightly pointing away from the rest of the kit. Okay, and then for the other side, same mic. So just with the way his cymbals are set up here, I'm going to try to capture this crash and this ride together in between, with this mic here, and then I'm going to mic the China separately. If I didn't have the extra third mic for the China, I would probably swing this mic around wider to try and get all of these three with one mic, but in this case, we're going to do that separate. So again, I'm trying to position this in between these two cymbals. I'm pointing basically at this edge and this edge of the cymbal. And we're in fairly close there. So we'll see how that sounds. All right, now in terms of phase and just stereo image of your overheads, I picked up this tip from producer John Fields when I was working in Toronto years ago. And he would measure the distance from the center of the snare to each overhead mic and make sure that that was equal. And that way you're going to get the snare level the same in both mics. So your snare image is not going to be drifting to the left or the right. So that's the strategy I've used. So I'm going to measure here and basically try to make sure they're pretty much the same distance away. So that's 44 inches. This is about 42 and a half. So I'm going to try to bring this guy in a little bit closer. Probably angle it back a little bit just so we're still pointing at the edge of the cymbals. And we'll measure it again. Okay, so that's pretty much equal distance there. This is maybe pointing a little bit too much at the ride compared to the crash here, so let's get it more in the middle. And you just go back and forth and just, try and find the spot where you're capturing the cymbal the way you want and where you have more or less equal distance. So that's pretty good right there. It's about 43 inches, 53. So we'll see how that sounds. That should give us a nice centered snare sound. The odd time, just depending on the spacing of all the pieces of the kit, you might get some weird phasing with the rest of the kit, but we're going to have to listen in the control room. But for the most part, if you take this approach, you're going to be okay phase-wise, and you're going to keep the snare in the center. So for the China, we have a third KM84. So again, a small diaphragm mic will work well here. Even in a pinch, you could use a dynamic like a SM7 or even a 57 on a China. You sound kind of dirty anyway, so if you need to, you can use a different mic for this. It's okay. It's only going to be played, certain parts of the song, so we'll probably have it pretty low in the mix except for in those key moments. So same technique again. We'll go about maybe that high above it, aiming again at the edge of the China here. That should be all right. And by the way, I should mention, I am setting up my overheads and everything from drummer's perspective. So when I'm in front of the speakers, I like to hear the hi-hat on my left, and then that crash will be on my left, and the toms going around drummer's perspective there. So this will be panned out all the way to the right. So just doing a quick once-over of these cymbal mics here. All right, for hi-hat, believe it or not, I've got the SM7B here. And this mic actually sounds really good on hi-hat. I've used it for years and years. Of course, if you have another small diaphragm pencil condenser, you can use that on hi-hat as well. But again, if you don't have a bunch of those mics, even a 57 or this guy here, the SM7, will sound good on hi-hat. And again, same kind of technique here. So we'll come fairly close to it, and we'll aim at the edge here. You want to have your hi-hat mic on a bit of an angle, especially if you're using a small diaphragm condenser, because if you just have it straight on, sometimes just the actual physical air moving from the hi-hats, if he's playing really hard and they're sloshing around, can actually influence the sound there. So if you kind of just angle it off a little bit like that, then you're going to avoid that problem. So let's try it about there. Maybe come up a little bit higher. And this way it's out of the path of his stick too. You don't want to have it, too close there that it's going to get hit. All right, so those are all the close mics on the kit. All right, for room mics, we're using a spaced pair of Neumann U87s. This is a classic studio large diaphragm condenser. They are expensive, so any large diaphragm will do. 414s, or you can go lower end. I certainly had, I think I had Audio-Technica 4040s back in my project studio that I would use for room tracks. So in a nice big room like this, I like to just have a space pair like this. I'd say we're about, 15, 20 feet away from the kit. That should be pretty good, almost as far back as we can get. I really like to get as much ambience as I can out of the room, so that's why I've got this space pair here. I'm actually gonna bring this one back a little bit because this one's more so like just the way the room is set up here. This mic is pointing like it's straight front and center of the drum, whereas this one's off more to an angle. So I'm gonna kind of, basically instead of having it like this, I'm gonna kind of turn it so the mics are like that, so they're a little bit more equal distant to the kit. So we'll bring this one back a little bit. And we're just pointing at the drum kit here. Now, for my last mic here that I'm using is, it's gonna be a mono room mic, but it's kind of cool. You've actually got it stuck back behind the piano here. So this is another U87 back here. I would have been happy to use any large diaphragm condenser. So this is a mono room mic, but it's a character mic. So I'm just trying to get a unique vibe, something different here. And I recommend doing this no matter what room you're in, whether it's big or small. If you have an extra mic available and an extra input available, it's good to throw it somewhere weird. In my little 600 square foot studio that I used to have, the tracking room was very small. So for drums, I couldn't get a good room sound for the drums. So what I did is I tried to go for something unique with lots of character instead. So I would put a pair of mics behind a door, kind of in the hallway, in the entranceway of the studio, and that had a really unique character that actually influenced my drum sound and my recordings for years and years. So whenever I'm able to, I like to have just a character mic, just something cool. So we're throwing this behind the piano, so we'll see how it sounds. We'll probably try to mess it up a bit through a compressor or transient designer or something. And again, just you never know what will happen. It could end up not getting used very much on the recording, or it could be it could become something that actually helps define the sound of the drums. So you never know. And if you have the chance, definitely try to do something cool like this.
Okay, guys. By the way, if you've got questions, don't worry. Just keep them in your mind or write them down and hold them. And then at the end of this session, we'll do some time for Q&A again. I'm going to show you guys another miking walkthrough that's really much shorter, but it's just going to show you a completely different session, completely different studio, different drummer, different band, even different mics that were available to me. So I want to just show you guys that so you can see how I use the exact same approach, but I swapped out some of the mics, but kept them all within the same family. So check out this little video here. So pretty standard setup for me. We got D112 and the kick. This is a nice Mapex drum set, bell brass snare. Not as deep as you normally see with bell brasses, but it sounded really good. So D112 on kick, 57s,
top and bottom snare. We got 421s on these toms and a D112 on the floor tom. Typically don't choose 421s on toms, but they ended up sounding pretty good today, actually. We got this small diaphragm on the hi-hat. I think that's an AKG something. Then we got these AKG small diaphragms up here. Kind of funny looking. You wouldn't think they were STCs, but they are, and they actually sound really good. So here's the setup. I'll just swing around here. You guys check it out from another angle. Spot mic to the China as well. With this guy, that's another AKG something. I'm not sure what it is. But there you go. That's the drum setup. And if we swing around here, right to the left of the drums, there's like a little booth. And we stuck a mic in there, and it actually sounds pretty good. It sounds pretty huge. And then out here, we're about this far, we had a pair of room mics, 414s, there's one right there. The other one we moved to do gang vocals. But that's basically the drum setup.
All right, so I just wanted to show you guys that other walkthrough, just so you can see, even though the mic selection that was available at that studio was different, I'm still looking for the same type of mic to accomplish the same kind of purpose, right? Staying within the families, also using the exact same positioning strategy and same room strategy. You see that mic that I had in that little booth beside the kit there? I actually got the drummer to play, and I was in that room, and I was like, you know, opening and closing that door like a couple inches at a time and listening and trying to find like, okay, where does this door need to be that gives me the best sound, right? Because if you close it all the way, it gets a little bit too dark and muddy and it's too far away. But just having it, like as you saw, it was like a crack open, like an inch open. You got enough of the high end and energy through, but it still sounded like really cool and vibey. So just keeping things like that in mind really can help you get a unique sound out of your drum kit. A few more quick things I want to cover about drum mics, maybe some common questions that I get. Number one, when should you use an outside kick mic, like a large diaphragm outside on the resonant head or a sub kick? For me, this is genre dependent, project dependent. All right. Sometimes it's great to have. Usually it's unnecessary. So I'd say if I'm getting tracks to mix and they've got an outside kick mic, if it's like an outside like condenser or something, 90% of the time I listen to it, but I'll usually just mute it. I don't even use it. It's not really useful. If it's like a sub kick, half the time I'll end up using it in the mix, half the time I won't. It depends on the band, the song, the genre. Because what that outside kick mic is going to pick up is going to be a lot of low end woofiness. It's going to be really low end, almost muddy, but that can be good sometimes to mix in with the brighter attack of the inside mic. But there's also going to be like a long sound, you know, like there's going to be a little bit of resonance. It's miking the resonant head. So the sound's not going to be like, poof, like really quick and short like the beater mic. It's going to be, poof, poof, it's going to ring out a little bit, right? And so sometimes I'm thinking of like if you're thinking of something Nickelback, right? Just like really straightforward, aggressive drums, not too fast of a tempo, lots of space in between the hits, then yeah, it's actually sometimes nice to have that outside kick mic, that sub kick that adds a little bit of length and kind of low mid thump to the kick. You have space for that. But if you've got like a technical metal band and there's lots of double kick, or just like even a punk band with like really fast drum beats, and you do not need that extra low end. And so most of the time I don't even set up an outside kick mic because I don't know, just after, again, 15 years of mixing, like I could care less if I get that track or not in the mix, you know, like you can always get enough low end out of the inside mic. It's only like if it's there and it sounds cool and they're spacing the arrangement for it, great. But having an outside kick mic, I'm really not worried about that. Next thing, managing bleed. Bleed's a big problem, right? And I talked about this in the video, but I just wanted to make sure you guys picked up on that. One of the most common issues is just hi-hat bleed in the snare, right? So you saw how in that video, I positioned the mic so that the back of the SM57 was pointing in between the hi-hat and the cymbal that were right there. Those are the closest cymbals that are going to bleed into that mic. And so that's why strategically, the back of that mic is right in between those two, because I'm going to try and reject both of them, right? So, yeah, thanks, man. Silencer is going to help a lot with that too. But if you can use mic rejection thoughtfully, strategically as you're tracking, that's going to make a world of difference in terms of what you're able to do in the mix and just the cleanliness of your tracks and all that. So you've got to be thinking of mic rejection. And most mics, especially the dynamics, right, they're cardioid pattern, right? So it's picking up kind of beside and in front of it, and it rejects behind. So keep that in mind. Like when you're, even if, let's say when you're miking the floor tom, you don't want to have that mic kind of right at the right side where it's pointing back across towards the snare. Even if it's pointing down at the floor tom, it's still kind of, the pickup pattern is still pointing directly across the kit where the snare and hi-hat are. So you don't want to do that, right? You want to have all of the mics basically pointing towards the drummer, pointing back away from the cymbals, away from the other parts of the kit, right? So really think about that, mic rejection when you're placing your drums. Okay, someone asked about cymbal placement. Let's come back to that. Okay, the issue of potentially asking drummers to move their stuff around if it's in bad spots. Let's talk about that at the end in the Q&A. And I wanted to highlight too, just to drive home the importance of getting a unique room sound wherever you are. Doesn't matter if you're in a tiny room, like whatever. It does add another dimension to your drums. Okay, and it makes them truly one of a kind, right? It makes every project sound like a one of a kind kit in your room. Okay, and in session 3, I'm going to talk a little bit more about exactly how to approach that in smaller rooms or kind of bad sounding rooms. But for now, we're going to move on. We're going to talk about signal chains, right? So you'll start hearing what these drums actually sound like under the mic. First, some really high level tips on your signal chains. Preamps. You want to use the best preamps you have on your kick, snare, and overheads, right? Because those are the parts of the kit that are going to be heard the most prominent in the mix. You don't want to use like your fancy Neve preamp on like a rack tom. It's going to get hit like 4 times in the song, right? Or a hi-hat, whereas like you're not even going to have that loud in the mix if he's not playing the hi-hat or the china or whatever, right? So if you've only got a few channels of really good preamps, you want to dedicate those to kick, snare, and overheads. Next, outboard compression. If you have no outboard compression, that's totally fine. But if you have it, I would use it on snare if you're confident with it. Okay, if you're really confident in dialing in that compressor and you're not worried about going too far or something, then go ahead and do that. Or alternatively, if you've got like that dirty character room mic, you can put that through a compressor if you have an extra one, and you can kind of compress that, mess that up a little bit, try to get like a cool vibe out of it. That is kind of one area where you can afford to be a little bit adventurous, a little bit risky, where you're going to kind of mess up the sound, but if you like it, usually that's like the coolest things that happen in the studio, or where you really try to create a unique sound and you actually commit to it, so you're not having to go back or trying to create it later, right? And that's one of the areas, like that dirty character room mic. That's one of the areas where you can experiment there. But if you don't have any outboard compression, totally fine, guys. Like for many years, I didn't use anything on the way in on my drums. I would still be happy to do that. I got a distressor eventually, really like that, and I would use it on snare on the way in and just do like 2-3 dB of gain reduction, which really just kind of helped pin the level and add a little bit of attack, but I wouldn't go overboard on that. Same thing with EQ. If you have nice EQ, hardware EQ, you can do a little on the way in, okay? You can do a little on kick. For a kick drum, in the mix, you're going to be sucking out mid-range and you're going to be boosting some top and bottom end. So you can do a little bit of that on the way in, right? I wouldn't try to go all the way to like final mix level of EQ. But, maybe go like 30 to 50% of the way. Same thing on snare. Like I know that I'm always going to add 8K on the snare, right? So if I'm in a studio with an SSL console or a Neve console or something, it's like, yeah, I'm going to use a little bit of that EQ on the way in because it's there. Otherwise, if you're not in a nice studio and you don't have a nice outboard EQ, like if you've got just some PreSonus and like lower end Focusrite stuff with like onboard EQ, like you don't bother using it because that stuff's not great. Just do it in the box later when you're mixing, right? So don't worry about needing fancy outboard gear to do this stuff. You really don't need it. Most of the records on my discography, if you listen to them, they were just recorded straight in from the preamps without any outboard. All right, so I'm going to queue up the next video. This is the signal chain video. So you're going to see what signal chains I'm using, what preamps, settings, all that stuff. You can actually hear what the drums sound like coming through the mics now.
All right, so we're in Pro Tools now, and all I've got set up so far is the click track and our ghost guitar track, which was pre-recorded just from a pre-production demo. So now we're gonna create all of our drum tracks. So let's do, I don't know, 8 mono tracks, a couple of stereo tracks, and we'll just go through setting all our inputs. Kick, snare top, snare bottom, tom 1, tom 2, hi-hat. Let's go China. And our last mono track, mono room. And our stereo tracks, overheads, and the rooms. Just organize this how I like it here. Create a group for the drums. Okay, so we're ready to start getting sounds from the drum kit, from the mics. So basically I'm going to use mostly the preamps from the Neve console here. So my preamp gain is up here, the red knob. The way the signal flow happens is it comes in here, this is the preamp gain, and then this fader down here is actually the output level, basically the send level into Pro Tools. And we're leaving this close to Unity here, just down a little bit so that we can drive the preamps a little bit. But basically we're just going to be setting the preamp level going into Pro Tools. Don't want to record too hot, leave lots of headroom, but generally I'm kind of aiming in like where it turns from green to yellow in the Pro Tools meter, which you'll see. The only other preamps I'm using are some APIs back here just for the overheads, but we'll get to that in a minute. So usually when I'm starting to get sounds, I like to just get the drummer to play his whole kit just to get a more realistic sense of how hard he's going to hit and just how everything's working together, and then I'll just start going through track by track and dialing it in. So for headphone mix, what we're doing is we're using these sends in Pro Tools here. So the click I've got going out headphone 5 is channel 5 on his headphone amp out there, and then my ghost guitar track is going out a separate channel there, and then I'm going to set up sends for his the rest of his kit as well, which is going to go output 3 and 4, headphone 3 and 4. We'll make these all pre-fader. And I'll just do a quick kind of rough estimate of where these faders are going to be at, just to give them a decent balance. And actually, once I dial in the levels, then I'll send all those drum tracks out to him in the headphone mix. But we'll start trying to hear some sounds here. Kick. Snare top and bottom. See, we're coming in a little bit hot in Pro Tools from where we had these faders here, so we're just bringing them down a little bit. Let's flip the phase on the bottom snare mic. Overheads here. So again, I'm on the API preamps for my overheads. know when to final mix. I like to try to get good sounds as I'm working here, so you see me pulling up EQs and stuff, cutting out some low end from the cymbals here, or the overhead tracks, just to kind of get less of the kit and more of just the focused cymbal sound, just so I can make sure I'm happy with how that's sounding. Chris, can you give me just like your left crash and then your right crash? Let's see what our rooms sound like. We'll check out our mono room. So this is the mic that is behind the piano there. That sounded pretty cool so far. Hey Chris, can I hear a China by itself? That sounded pretty good. We'll cut out a bunch of low end from that too. We don't need that. And your hi-hat? Just again, doing a really quick, just kind of pre-mix, rough mix job with these. It can be a little hotter. All right, rack tom. Let's bring that down a bit. And like I was saying in the live room, I like to pan drummer perspective. And to get a basic gate going during tracking too, just to clean up. All right, floor. I think all of our basic tones are sounding pretty good. So everything sounded pretty good so far. To me, the cymbals almost sound a little, I don't know, they could be a little brighter, a little sharper. So I'm maybe going to try and aim them a little more towards the edge of the cymbals and maybe bring them up a tiny bit and then see how that sounds. So I'm going to head out there now. So like I was saying before, I want to point these towards kind of the edge of the cymbals. So I'm going to do that a little bit more here. And I think I'm going to raise them both about an inch. Angle this one down away from the middle of the cymbal bit. We'll bring it up. Okay, let's do a quick check again with our tape measure. Chris, can you hold this in the middle of your snare drum? 44, 45, sounds a bit further. So we just gotta raise this one up about 1 more inch. Okay. Let's see how that is. There we go, 45, 45, all right. Other than that, I thought maybe the hi-hat could come up a bit, or just be angled away slightly more. Sometimes in these overhead mics and cymbal mics, you can almost kind of hear the air hitting it, so I just want to make sure we're not too close or just pointing too directly at it. So we'll try that, make sure nothing else moved. Cool, let's go see how it sounds. Okay, so just your whole kit with lots of crashes for me. And level-wise, I'm just adjusting the preamps here, so the left and right overhead channels when he's hitting the snare is more or less the same on the meters here. We'll give him a bit more headroom. That's sounding better. A little just crisper on the cymbals now. All right, I'm kind of just fine-tuning stuff at this point, so keep playing, whole kit. So I'm just fine-tuning levels, going into Pro Tools, making sure I have enough headroom for everything. Get our kick sounding a little more modern here. Scoop out some of these low mids. Give it a top end boost here. All right, now we have the snare running into a distressor over here. So we're gonna try and get a bit of compression on the snare just to just to give it a little bit more snap and punch, but also just to kind of cap the level and contain it a little bit. So I'm going to use 3-to-1. Medium or slow attack, make sure we let the transient through. I want to be pretty light on this. I don't want to kind of paint myself into a corner with this compression, but sometimes a little analog compression is good if you have the option. If I didn't have an outboard compressor at a different studio, I would just go straight into Pro Tools, no problem, like I am with most of these other tracks. It's bypassed. That's in. Bypass. So I'm not hammering this, just a subtle little boost of attack there. And that's going to help our level into Pro Tools stay pretty consistent as well. Make our snare a little brighter here. Just to get a little closer to what it's going to be like in the end. And let's give it a bump at 200 too. Now I could be adding a little bit more EQ on the board here, just subtly going into Pro Tools, but for the sake of this course, just to keep things really simple, and mostly, other than the snare compressor like you saw, I'm just going to kind of go straight in here, and that's why I'm using the plugins instead. All right, so we're going to try and dial in the transient designer here on the mono room. So it's off right now. I'm going to flip it in right now. Start turning the sustain knob. And hear it start pumping now. That's pretty trashy on the cymbals. We'll back it off a bit. I'm gonna mess with the attack knob a bit too. Just bypass. So we're adding some dirt to it, some grit. Again, just trying to get some character out of this, something a little nastier, just to give us some extra flavor in our drums. I'm just setting the monitoring level I like for just listening to this while we track. So quick overview of the signal chains that we're using here. Kick drum is going into the Neve preamp, no EQ or anything, that's going right into Pro Tools. Snare top, we're going into the Neve as well, over to the distressor and then into Pro Tools. Snare bottom is just the Neve preamp right into Pro Tools. Same with the rack tom and the floor tom. Hi-hat as well. The overheads, I decided to use the APIs over here. I'm pretty familiar with the APIs. They're nice and fast and clean, and I like the way they sound on anything, but it's a good choice for overheads, but of course it would sound just as good on the Neve too, but just a personal preference there. And then everything else, we're also using the Neve preamp. So the stereo rooms, it's just Neve into Pro Tools. Same with the China. Mono room is also in the Neve preamp here. We actually have it patched into an SPL transient designer, which we're going to check out in a minute. And like I was kind of saying in the room, I just want to have kind of a character track and maybe mess it up a little bit. We're going to crank the sustain on that. It's going to be kind of similar to compressing heavily with all buttons in 1176 or something. So we'll see if we can get a good vibe out of that and see what happens. So that's basically the signal chains for the whole drum kit here.
All right, guys. So before we get to questions, I just want to give you two more examples of just live recorded drum tracks, just so you just have a little bit more of a wider example of what good live drum tracks sound like. So let me switch over to Pro Tools here. All right, so I've got two different sessions here. So the first one I'll play for you. This is from a Silverstein record. This was recorded in my tiny little drum room that I used to have. So let's isolate some of the parts of the kit. So here's the kick drum with nothing, with EQ. Okay, snare, here's the raw snare, and then I'll throw my processing on. Snare bottom. And toms, we got a whole bunch of tom stuff happening here at the beginning. Okay, overheads. So obviously when we cut out all the low end from the overhead tracks, you get a lot more focus in the cymbals, but you can still hear when he's hitting the crashes, like we're mic'd fairly close. We have a lot of clarity and a lot of cymbal in those mics, right? Here's my stereo rooms. Those kind of suck. Here's the hallway mic. Cool, so that's one example of some drums. Now I'll give you another example. This is that second walkthrough of the miking that I showed you in the second studio where we had different mics and everything like that. Here's what those drums sound like. So this is a brass snare. Notice how it's very aggressive and forward in the mid-range. Toms. Here it is without EQ. So often, you know, with the tom tuning strategy I showed you, you're going to get very kind of, well, honestly, any tuning strategy, anytime you mic a tom, it's going to sound like very kind of boxy, honky, like these. Listen. Every tom needs just a big cut in the mid-range, right? But with that tuning, once you cut out the mid-range with the EQ like that, you're going to have nice top-end smack on all the tom hits there. And I'll show you the overheads real quick. Nice and shimmery, shiny. Stereo room tracks. And the mono room, this is the one that was in the booth beside the kit. And I want you guys to see, like, you know, earlier on I was talking about mic bleed and using positioning to minimize mic bleed. Like, a lot of controlling bleed happens at the tracking stage, right? So check out these tracks, right? Look at these kick and snare tracks. There's like hardly any bleed. Here, I'll even zoom in on the waveform, right? There's not much there, right? Then even in the tom tracks, right? You can tell just by looking at this that this is well recorded because there's not a crazy amount of bleed in the mics, right? Even this session here, again, this was a much smaller room. Like the room's probably 10% of the size of that second example. But look, same thing. You can see we've got a lot of good isolation in the tom tracks, not a lot of bleed. Same thing on the snare. There's like almost nothing coming through. I mean, obviously if you listen to it, there is noise coming through. But, you know, sometimes I get sessions where other people recorded it and like, you know, the bleed in between the tom hits is like, it's like way up here, right? It's like almost at the same level of the tom hits, and that's a recording mistake, right? So just wanted to show you guys those two examples, just so you get a better idea of obviously what raw tracks sound like off the mic when you've done it like this, how easy it is to get that modern sound once you put the processing on those raw tracks, and then even just seeing, you know, what these tracks look like. Obviously, you don't want to make decisions and mix with your eyes or anything like that, but you know, you can look at tracks like this and tell like, okay, how's the bleed control? What's the consistency? You know, things like that. So I know that was a pretty dense session, guys, in terms of everything I just threw at you. So let's take some time here for some Q&A. Again, let's try to keep it to the topic of what we talked about in this video. If you've got questions about drum sizes and drum heads and tuning, we covered that in the last session, so maybe you missed that one. Check the replay for that. Let's just talk about miking drums, mic strategies, mic placement, signal chains, things like that, all right? And then the next session, we're going to talk more about performance, how to manage like getting good takes and that sort of thing. All right, how do you get the hi-hat so focused? I find that mine smears across the stereo overheads. Yeah, I mean, you're always going to get the hi-hat showing up everywhere, right? Definitely in the overheads. Smearing across the overhead. I mean, it depends where your overhead mics are placed. You know, again, like if you notice, like my overhead mics are placed towards the outside edge of the cymbals, right? And so like that's kind of a strategic way of using the cymbals themselves as a bit of a noise barrier, right? You think about it, like a cymbal is like kind of, it's big and round and it's straight across. So if you've got your hi-hat over here and then your cymbals here and your mic is at the outside edge of that cymbal, well, the sound that's being directed from the hi-hat, it has to go through that cymbal and then hit the mic, right? So, you know, that might be part of it. Sometimes I have the mics kind of angled a tiny bit away from the kit as well, which is going to mean they're a little bit angled away from the hi-hat, so that could help too. And then it's just having that close mic, right? Like there's a lot of hi-hat in the overhead mics regardless, but just having the placement of the close mic and having that sound nice and crisp, and mixing that in, that's really where the focus comes from. All right, Anthony, for snare and shells, is it better to leave compression for mix stage, as compressing it at entry before gating would boost the bleed, hence making it harder to gate afterwards? Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, generally, like I said, I don't compress very hard on shells on the way in. I mean, I typically I don't do it if the studio doesn't have a good compressor, but if the studio's got a distressor or something, I'll throw it on the top snare. But yeah, like literally just like 2 to 3 dB of reduction. I don't know if you could see in that video, if you're watching where that distressor was, it was just a couple lights lighting up, right? Because you're right, yeah, it is going to bring up the noise floor, make it harder later on. But yeah, I'm okay with a little bit of that trade-off, but usually just on snare top, just a tiny bit. Pig saying, what samples do you use? Do you sell a wave bundle pack? And do you use a click every time? Samples, yeah, I use all my own drum samples. I created them all myself. I do not sell them anymore. I just include them in my full training program. Anyone who's a part of that, you can get my full drum sample library. I don't sell them separately. Do you use a click every time? Yes, 100%. Absolutely, you have to. Like if you are not recording rock music to a click track and then editing the drums to the grid afterwards, you are not making professional rock music, right? You're just not making a pro record. I don't want to go too down the rabbit hole on that. I don't want to debate it. It's just a fact. It's just a fact, okay? Listen to any pro record out there today. The drums are on the grid. The drums are quantized. It's not really up for debate. Yes, there's outlier examples, okay? But 99.999%, that's the way it's done. So yes, you have to do that if you want to exist in the pro world. Okay. Interesting to see how you position the mics in a small room that doesn't give you a good room sound, especially the overheads. Yeah, I would do it the same, man. Tune in for the next the next session because we're going to talk about that exactly. Can you get away with one mono room mic? Yeah, definitely. I used a mono room mic for quite a while. It's not ideal because you kind of cloud up the center of your mix. Like you can't use very much of it in the mix because it takes up a lot of space. Like a whole drum kit playing cymbals, everything, it's very full range in the frequency spectrum. So if you try to like push that up loud in your mix, well, you're competing kind of with everything in the vocal and stuff, right? So it's really interesting what happens. Like I used to put a mono room mic just outside the door, right beside the kit. So it's literally 5 feet away from the kit, but it's behind a closed door in this little hallway. And it made it sound like it was like 20 feet away, and it sounded like a huge room. Like it's very cool. You can achieve cool effects. That's kind of what I've been explaining. Anyways, I used to use a mono room mic out there, and it sounded really cool, but yeah, I couldn't use too much of it because the snare sounded great in it. But if I pushed it up too much, I had too much cymbal, and that kind of like messed with the drum sound. But then I started putting an XY pair of mics in there, just like stereo configuration in the same room, in the same spot. And even though it's like literally a tiny little space, like literally like 4 feet by 4 feet, I got a stereo mic in there. For whatever reason, it's just like, it just spread the whole sound of the drum kit out, right? It's just like, if you have a pair, if you can spare the extra budget, again, you don't need to use expensive mics. You know, rather than having a $500 mono room mic, I'd rather have two $200 room mics and go stereo, right? It just works a little better in your mix. It's a little more versatile. So yes, you can get away with it. I in a pinch, I would do that. If there's any way you can get two, even better. Doug, are room and character mics set to Omni or cardioid? Usually cardioid. I've tried Omni and stuff. I don't know. It just doesn't really make that much difference. So I usually just typically leave them cardioid and point it at the kit. Shannon, how is the real transient designer different from the plugin? I don't think it's that different, but I've never really used a transient designer plugin, and I never really used the hardware except for like in that session for the video. I was messing around with it, so I'm not much of a transient designer guy, expert in that. How do you place the hi-hat and China mics? Are they placed in the same strategy as overheads or specific distance? Yeah, they're not. Well, they're placed the same as the overheads in terms of like they're on the outer edge of the cymbal, right? Not pointing to the middle of the cymbal, but close to the cymbal, outer edge, probably closer than the overheads, right? Like the overheads, there's a little bit more space up above between the cymbal and the mic. China and hi-hat, I'm miking those closer, but I'm not measuring the distance from the snare or anything like that. I'm just putting them where you saw, like towards the outside edge. So the outside edge of the hi-hat, outside edge of the China, like that. In terms of phase and stuff, like with this approach, with the spaced pair, measuring the snare, and then having the spot mics for China, sometimes you get a little bit of a phase thing happening, and that's why as you're setting up the mics, you've just got to solo your overhead mics and just listen to, like, that's why you heard me say, hey, can you give me your left and right crash just by themselves and China? Because I'm just listening to that pair of mics. How do the cymbals sound? Because sometimes you'll get a phasiness. It'll just randomly happen. And that it's very rare. Like maybe 5% of the time I'll hear something weird like that. If that happens, then you just have to move the mic a bit, right? So like, again, you've already measured so that they're equal distant. So if you get like a phasiness, then just like move one like 2 inches to the left and the other one 2 inches up or something like that. You know, like just create a different like mathematical arrangement, and usually that will solve the phase problem. But it's pretty rare that that's going to happen. The reason I'm saying that is because sometimes you'll also get that with the China, where in the China mic, it sounds a little bit phasey with the rest. In that case, again, just raise it up a couple inches or drop it an inch or just move it slightly toward like a couple inches around the edge of the cymbal like that. And usually the phase problem goes away. Do you have any EQ and compression on the mix bus during tracking? Nope. Do you record the changes you make with EQ in the video, or that's just better listening? Yeah, that was just plugins in the DAW just for monitoring, right? Because as I'm tracking a record, I want to know how close I am, or I want to make sure that I'm in the right ballpark, right? Because this takes experience, but like I've mixed a lot of records. I've recorded a lot of songs. I've recorded drums a lot. So like I know what like a raw kick track sounds like. I know what like a raw snare sounds like. I know that like there's no chance in the world that the top snare mic is going to sound like a snare sounds on an actual record that's been EQ'd and processed and all that, right? Like it's too far. Like there's too much processing used these days. So yeah, as I'm tracking, I'm going to throw out plugins to monitor through where I'll add a little top end. I'll add some bottom end. I'll like shape the kick a little bit just so that I'm like, with the kick, I'm like, okay, I think this sounds pretty good. Let me just throw up a quick EQ here. Just take 30 seconds, do a normal kind of kick EQ move. And if I do that, and if I'm like, wow, it's still like really muddy, or I still can't get the attack, and it's like, okay, I'm probably not getting the right source here. So let's go and adjust the tuning or the mic position so that, with my quick EQ, I instantly know like, oh yeah, I'm in the right ballpark. This is sounding like close to a record, right? So that's the reason I'm doing that. But no, that's not being printed down to the track. That's just for listening. And as I'm tracking, I want to hear a real world representation, right? I don't want to hear completely raw mics. Like that's so boring. Your client doesn't want to hear that either. Like make it sound like a record the whole time. Can there be rooms that are too big? Yeah, I think so. It's not really the size. It's more of like the reflection in the room, right? Like you could have a huge room, but if it's got a lot of things in it to stop reflections going everywhere, then, you might be fine. But if it's a really big room with super bare walls, like a big concrete or wood room, then yeah, you're going to get so much ambience and kind of sound back into your mics that is super delayed that it's going to make things sound a little smeary. But I'd take a bigger room over a smaller room for sure. Is it worth miking resonant heads on toms and every cymbal with a separate mic? Nope. No, I never mic the bottom of toms. There's no reason you need to do that. Every cymbal with a separate mic? No. Typically you can get 2 cymbals with 1 mic, so like, or even 3. Like if I've got like a crash, a ride, and a China, like 1 mic kind of in the middle of all those is going to pick those up well. Now, if the China's a little further off to the side, yeah, you might want to spot mic that, just especially if he's using it a lot for key parts in the song, so you can turn that up in the mix. But no, you don't need to mic every cymbal. I think that's overkill. Cool, thanks Jade. No worries. How far from the kit should be the pair of room mics? Again, that's room dependent. You want to get at least like 10 feet away. Probably minimum is nice. But you can go further. If the room's bigger, then try further. Even just walk around the room while the drummer's playing and stand in different spots and try to figure out where does it sound cool here. Because some rooms are weird. Like one of my favorite drum room sounds I ever got was on a Silverstein record, and it was a nice studio, but where they put the kit was like right in front of a wall, and then probably like 15 feet away was this like brick wall, and we put the room mics right there. So they were only like 10 feet away from the kit, and around the corner there was like an extra 20 feet. We could have gone way far away, and we did put like a mono mic over there, which sounded really cool, but the main stereo room mics were only like 10 feet away from the kit. But just because it was like that brick wall, there's something like magical about that space that it just sounded really, really big and cool. So you got to just kind of experiment and walk around the room and see where it sounds cool. But, generally, once you're like 10 feet and more, you are definitely getting the space and ambience. And by the way, like, not all rooms sound good. Like, in that video example where we're recording drums there, like, the room is big, but, like, it's too dead. There's not really, like, a cool reflective spot in the room. So, like, the room tracks are not that good there. Like, every room's different. That's why, again, you got to go for, like, a character spot. Find something that's behind a door or in a hallway that's going to, give you something cool. Ricky, would duplicating a mono room mic track and panning each track out achieve a similar effect? No, that wouldn't work. You could, like, time delay it and pitch delay it. I've actually never tried that, but I don't think that would give you the same effect. And if you just duplicate it and panned it, they would just sum to mono anyway to be the same thing. All right, is it better to have the mics on stands or are clip mics okay? I would put them on stands, preferably. Sometimes if you've got like a really tight drum kit setup, where there's tons of cymbals and toms and it's like really hard to get mic stands in there, you can go for clips on like the toms. But typically, like if they're on a stand, it's just a little more solid, right? Like if they get hit, like it's probably not going to move as much. You have a little bit more control. Like with on a mic on a stand, you can pretty much point it and place it anywhere as long as there's, nothing getting in the way. Whereas a clip, you're kind of limited to like certain angles and space and distances, right? So prefer stands. Clip is okay, but also the stand is like a clip mic is also gonna move, like as they're hitting the tom, like you'll see those mics shaking around a bunch, right? So I want to just kind of separate the stand from the drum itself, just so we don't really get that. But in a pinch, it works. All right, do all these techniques still apply if you're recording a band with 2 drummers and drum kit at the same time? I'm about to tackle a project like that. Whoa. Have you ever recorded 2 drummers at once? Oh, man. You're stressing me out, dude. Do they have to play at the same time? Yeah, that is tricky. Geez, I've never even heard of a project like that. Full drum kit? I'd have to hear, like, what does the song sound like? Because in my head, it's just like, that sounds like a disaster, Like, how are you going to, they're going to be flamming each other, like not hitting at the exact same time? Like, that sounds pretty rough. Unless one was like, unless they're playing very different parts, hopefully, right? Hopefully they're playing very different parts. Otherwise, it's going to be a nightmare. So maybe one's doing more like cymbal-y stuff and percussive. The other one's doing like the driving beat. I guess you could do that. Wow, that's crazy. That's a challenge. What was your question again? Yeah, I mean, it depends, man. I would probably, if it's a normal drum kit on each drummer, I would probably approach it the same. But yeah, if the drummer's if one drummer's playing kind of very different sounding stuff or different type of part, then I might adjust my approach depending on that, or like maybe, again, this is all theoretical. I'd have to hear the arrangement in the song, but like maybe one drummer is doing the driving beat. You get a really nice, tight, punchy kit sound like we're working on here. Maybe the other drummer's adding more accents and stuff. You might want to mic stuff further away and go for a more like, distant miking strategy so that their drum kit is a little set further back. You know what I mean? Because somehow you've got to create separation between these 2 drummers. Because if you've got literally 2 close mic'd rock drum kits competing with each other, that's rough. So yeah, that's very, very situation dependent. So I would really think hard about what is each drummer playing. I would also really think hard about tracking them separately. So you have control in the mix a little more, and obviously get them away from each other as much as possible so you're not bleeding from the other kit. And man, that's a challenge. You're not going to run into that very often. Ben, if I'm recording in an unideal room, should I hang up acoustic treatment? Yeah, we're going to cover that in the next session really, really soon. Do you have any experience on 57 on toms? Yeah, I don't know if I've ever used them in the studio. I think I have maybe once or twice in a pinch. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Interesting question here. Any advice on how to learn how to hear tiny mic placement moves? What to listen to, what to not listen to? Right. So, okay, I'll use 2 examples that are common for drums. So you saw this happen in this video where I went in and I raised the overhead mics up a bit. So I like to mic the overhead mics pretty close, right? Because I'm trying to make them like cymbal mics. But sometimes they're a little too close depending on the size of the cymbal. And the cymbals sound kind of woofy. Like there's a lot of like low end, like kind of build up, which this is the proximity effect, right? You guys know that when you go close to a mic, there's more low end. When you're further away, there's less low end. And so if I'm hearing like too much woofiness from the cymbal and like, yeah, just like this, like that kind of low end energy from the cymbals, then I'm going to go out and I'm going to raise up those overhead mics just an inch or 2 and then come back. And usually when you do that, you're going to hear way less low end. You're going to hear more of like a shimmery sound. So the key is like, I'll give it one more example. Like on the inside kick mic, something that's common is like playing with the distance where that is. So normally I'll put the inside kick mic kind of halfway inside the kick drum, pointing at the beater, right? Now, some drums, let's say you put that in there, and what you're getting is a lot of like kind of muffly mid-range and maybe even lots of attack, but you're not really getting any low end at all. Well, in that case, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to back off that mic away from the beater head. I'm going to move it a little back towards the resonant head, which is going to give us a little more low end. And then also by moving it away from the beater, sometimes the sound pressure level, like the intensity of the hit on the drum is just, it makes it really like in the mic, and you need to back off the mic so it just kind of opens up the sound a little bit and allows a little more top end just detail, rather than the mic just being like pounded with sound pressure, right? So those are some examples, and they both relate to like just typical behavior of mics, right? Which is like proximity effect. Getting closer to the mic, you get more low end. Further away, you get less low end. So you want to be thinking about things like that, right? Or let's say on your snare, it just doesn't sound super focused. You're not getting like a lot of punch to it. Well, in that case, you might be too far away because you're not getting enough low end from being close enough to get that kind of oomph and punch. Or maybe your mic is like not pointing down at the snare. Maybe it's pointing too much across the snare, and so you're not getting like the impact of it. You're just kind of getting the tone of it. So you've got to just, I guess, hopefully that helps, man. It's like what you're listening to is like, first you got to think of, you don't want to just go and move mics around without a purpose, right? So you're going to follow the blueprint that I showed you. And then from there, you've got to think and listen, like, okay, what am I hearing? What is wrong with this? Like, what's the problem I'm trying to correct? And then logically, how do I correct this? So if the problem I'm hearing is that it's too much woofiness or muddiness or low end, then what are you going to do with the mic to correct that? Well, you're going to move it further away because that's going to reduce the low end, right? Or, hey, this is not very focused. It's not very clear. I'm not getting a lot of detail from this. Then you want to try and go closer, or you want to try and make sure you're pointing more directly at the source. Right. So hopefully that helps, man. It's a good question, but it's all about just thinking about what am I trying to achieve, and it's just understanding and following those simple rules about how mics behave, like how their rejection behaves, the proximity effect. That's really kind of the main things you need to think about. Shannon, what do you do if the drummer's rack tom is super angled? Oh yeah, I hate that. Well, you got to work with the drummer a bit, because think about it. Like, see if you guys can see. Okay, so here's here, let me go this way. Here's a drum, right? So typically, like, you want the drum to be pretty flat, and then you hit it with the stick like that, right? Now, if their head is angled, look at how you're hitting it. You're hitting the drum with the tip of the stick. That's not how you play drums, right? Like, it needs to be more like that. It's okay, a little bit of an angle's okay. So if they're coming in with like a super angled tom, it's just like, dude, like, you know, look at what's happening here. Like, you might as well take your drumstick and like push the drum. Like, that's not going to give you the tone out of the drum, right? So I would just kind of work with them, be like, hey man, like, I noticed this is super angled. Like, you notice how like when you hit this, it's really just kind of pushing the tip of the drum rather than like on your snare, how you really hit it like that. That's how you get the right tone of a drum. So like, let's angle this back a little bit. Plus it's gonna be really hard for you to mic. Like, you know, how are you got to get a mic in here and then pointing down. Like, that's super tough, right? And it's going to be in his way. So yeah, you got to like, that's one of those moments where you got to step up and kind of correct poor technique, frankly. Right. And that's the difference between amateurs and pros in the studio. Amateurs allow people to get away with subpar equipment and performance and tuning and technique, whereas pros will push people to a higher standard and demand proper sounds, proper technique, as good as you can get. If your room is twice as long as wide, would you want the kit in the center of the room or closer to one end? I'd put them closer to one end. That's typically every studio I record at. Rarely am I right in the middle of the room. Typically it's towards one end. I would put a lot more treatment in that end. I'm going to talk about that in the next video. And then, yeah, that will give you more space to separate your room mics. Could your room mic be turned away from the kit and close to a reflective surface to compensate for a smaller room? Yes and no. Like, yes, you could try that. If it's a small room, is it going to work? Probably not. Just my experience. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next session as well. Do you never use LDCs as overheads? I have used them. Extremely rare. So this question always comes up, but I'm glad you asked. So small diaphragms are like, they're going to give you a more focused sound. They're more directional. They're more detailed, more of a shimmery top end. A large diaphragm condenser, yes, it's going to work, but you're going to accomplish something different with your overhead mics. You're going to get more of a full kit. You're going to get more room tone, and you're going to get less focused directional sound. So if you're using LDCs, you can put them in the same place that you saw me put these ones, but they're not going to be as like clear and clean and focused as the ones you heard here. They're going to be wider. They're going to be a little more smeary. I don't mean in a phasey way. I just mean like there's just going to be more of everything in them. There's going to be less separation stereo-wise. They're just broader. They just pick up a broader kind of sound. And so for the type of music that I'm typically recording, like rock, even pop, and especially metal and stuff, I don't want that. I want clear, focused, bright overheads. I don't want like a kind of general overall kit sound. I want cymbals. I want cymbal detail, right? So it's not like it's wrong to use LDCs as overheads, but again, start with the end in mind. What are you trying to accomplish? So there have been times where I have used LDCs for overheads, but it's like, I mean, there were times in the past where I used them and I just didn't know what I was doing and why, I didn't have a reason. I just was trying it. But these days, if I was to do it, it would be for a specific reason. It would be exactly because of that. Like maybe it's more of an indie rock band and I'm going just for more of a mellow kind of less super detailed, less like exciting, shiny drum kit sound. I want the drums to maybe sit back and be a little bit mellowed out. And I don't care if the cymbals are super detailed and separated, then yeah, like using LDCs might be the right approach for that. But just know that that's what you're going to get out of LDCs as overheads. So again, start with the end in mind. What do you want? Use the best mic for the job. Do PZM mics have an interest in the studio? I've never really used them. I'm super unfamiliar. Those like the ones you like clip onto the floor or like a wall or something. I've never really used those. Again, you don't need to overcomplicate, right? No one asked about ribbon mics. So I'll just wrap it up talking about that. You generally do not want to use ribbon mics on your overheads, okay? What I just said about LDCs versus SDCs for overheads, times it by 4 with ribbon mics, okay? They're going to be very dark, not detailed. They're going to be, just super dark, super mellow sounding. There's not going to be fast like response on the transients like you would on SDCs. So for rock, I don't know why anyone would use ribbon mics for like rock and metal. Anytime I see that happening, it's just like you've watched too much YouTube, you've been on the Gear Sluts forum, and people are saying how amazing ribbon mics are on overheads. Like you know, once you try it, it's like, this is not the sound, right? even on room mics, they're just too dark, they're too mellow. Like, and there are some cases where ribbon mics are really cool, but in general, they're like pretty much the least versatile mics you could have in the studio. And generally for like, again, remember session 1, what kind of sound are we going for? You guys all said tight, punchy, powerful, larger than life, impactful, clear. Those are not like the characteristics of like a ribbon mic, right? So I know no one asked, but I'm sure someone watching the replay or in the future is going to be wondering about that. Okay, are there any approaches that you have changed since these videos you made? Nope, absolutely not, man. I've used that exact tuning miking approach since, again, 2010 or 11 or something. Made these videos like 2017. And again, I just showed you one of those mic walkthroughs from last summer. Exact same approach. Haven't changed it at all. Cool, guys. So let's wrap it up there. The next session's starting really soon, like in 30 minutes, less than 30 minutes. Okay, it's at 2 p.m. Eastern time, and we're going to talk about everything I just showed you, the miking strategy, room track, whatever, like how to do this in any place, right? So what happens if your room is small? What happens if you don't have treatment? How should you treat it? What if the room sucks? What if the drummer sucks? How do you actually guide the performance? What's the workflow for actually capturing the takes? This is where it all comes together, right? Let's talk about drum tracking workflow and performance tips. So again, this is where the rubber meets the road, right? Nothing else matters unless you get a good performance. So like I said, this is my favorite part to talk about. So let's talk through the drum tracking workflow. What do you do when you're ready to record, right? So the way I recommend for drums is you want to get really big chunks of drum performances. Ideally, you want to get them to play like the whole song a couple times through. And for me, I want to get 3 decent, good takes of the whole song. 3 takes of the whole song. Okay, so now they don't have to necessarily play the whole song start to finish in one go. I just want the whole song 3 times, right? So that means, let's say they start the song, they get to the first chorus and they screw up one of the fills in the first chorus and they stop playing. Well, I won't go back to the beginning again. I'll let them punch in the chorus and then keep going to the end. That might happen a couple times throughout the song, but as long as I have 3 full takes of the entire song, then the next step is we're going to go and we're going to comp those together, right? Which means taking the best of each of those 3 takes for each section. So you listen to the first verse, check all 3 takes. What's the best one? That one goes onto the main track. That becomes the take that we use for the verse. And same thing, chorus. What's the best take that we got? And we piece together the best combination of those 3 takes, right? Or maybe one take. Maybe you sometimes you get a special take where almost the whole thing is like really great, but then maybe one of the fills is kind of weak there. Well, then you go back to those other 2 takes and you see if you got it that time, and you can just copy those in, right? I'll show you what this looks like in a second here. So once we get those 3 takes comped together with the best take of each section, then there's still a couple parts that need to be fixed still, right? Like, again, because as I'm getting those 3 big takes, I'm not thinking like super, super fine detail. I'm thinking like, I want to get this thing 80% done. So we'll comp it together, and then usually there's still going to be some parts where maybe there's a drum fill that we're comping, and I'm like, you know what? And all 3 of these takes, we didn't quite get it good enough. So like, I'll put a marker there on the session, and then we'll put all the markers in. Let's say there's 5 spots I want the drummer to punch in. Then he's going to go in the room, and we're just going to hit those 5 spots and focus on those and punch them in on that comp track until we get the take we want, right? So let me switch to Pro Tools here, and I'll try to show you just exactly what I mean, like just what this workflow is in action. So here's a real session here. So in Pro Tools, we have playlists, right? So every one of these playlists, this is a different take, right? So remember what I said? There's extra ones here. Those are just for space for working on stuff. But you can see I've got 1, 2, 3 takes, right? So let's listen to this chorus, and let's see what's the best take. Okay, I like that one because he's hitting a bit harder. Okay, so in this case, I'd probably take number 2. So I'll grab that, press copy, and then I'll go up to my main playlist here. This is going to be the final take playlist, and I'll just paste it there. Now, there is kind of a weak hit right here, so let's listen again. Notice how he kind of misses the rim shot there. So let's check another take. That's kind of weak too. That one's a little better, but that's a case where, okay, he kind of like missed that snare hit on all of the takes there. So I'd probably put a marker there and write punch. And so I know that when he goes back in the live room, we're going to punch in that spot and try to get that hit a little stronger, right? Or if we're looking at this fill, for example, he's really rushing the snare at the start of that. So let's see if we got that on another take. There we go. That one's pretty good too. So that's an example of where you can just grab that fill, and let's say everything else in this take was good, but you wanted that fill from this take. You just paste it in place there. You got to finesse the punch-in points a little bit. All right, so we'd probably have to punch in here. All right, so that's how you would go through the entire song and be comping it along the way, choosing the best parts, fixing bad fills, stuff like that. Now, in terms of like, what are you thinking about? How are you guiding the drummer as you're going through this process and tracking them? What should you be listening for, right? There's essentially two things that you're trying to manage, and that's timing and energy. Timing and energy. Okay, so for timing, listen, I already talked about this. The drums pretty much always need to be edited to the grid after. Okay, so in terms of timing, of course, the tighter the better, but you also have to discern like what is the maximum skill of this drummer. Because a lot of drummers, they're only ever going to be like about 90% on the click at their best, right? No one's going to nail it perfectly all the time. So you're not necessarily shooting for perfect timing, but you're shooting to get the timing as good as you know they can be, right? And that's why it helps to get long takes at first in drums. Like, don't just dive into drums and try to punch in tiny sections, because you need to get a feel for like, how good is this drummer? Like, how much can I push him? How close can he be timing wise? All right, how consistent is this guy? Because, you know, there's only so much energy any human has, and you only have so much time in your session, right? Time limits are real. So you've got to establish, okay, what are the weaknesses? What are the strengths? How good or bad is this drummer? How close can I get them here, right? And you want it to be close enough that you'll be able to edit it with a minimum amount of artifacts, and that takes experience. But, you know, again, that's why you need to be full stack. You need all of these skills together. Eventually, you'll get to the point where you've edited so many drum tracks that you know, like, just by listening and looking, you know if something is a little bit too off, too late or too early, and that, you know, you're going to get a really bad artifact when you try to edit it, right? It's not editable, right? So there's a quick, easy way to figure that out. You could just, you know, grab a chunk and just edit it right there on the spot. Even if the band's in the studio, you're not sure if whether a part is good enough, and the drummer's sketchy, so you're not sure if you like most of the time, if you're not sure if it's good enough, it's probably not. You send the drummer back in. But if you're at the end of a long day and it's like, you don't know if this guy can ever do it better, then yeah, maybe you need to go and just do a quick little test, you know? So here's an example. Let me get Pro Tools back up here. So let's say I'm a little concerned. I'm not sure if he's hit that close enough to the grid. You can just go ahead and you just cut out this section. I'm just going to edit this by hand just to show you. We can kind of see whether or not a take is going to work, all right? So I'm just cutting up every hit, snapping to the grid. There's a much faster way of doing this, but just for example, like this, these hits are pretty off right there, right? Okay, let's listen to that. Obviously there's gaps, so we'll just fill that with crossfades. Now let's see if we get any nasty artifacts here. Turns out all right. right? So that's just a quick and easy way. If you're ever unsure, like don't let the drummer leave and tear down the drum kit on something you're unsure about, right? Like you want to do a quick test and really just make sure that you've got it, right? Because you might be questioning a part and you want to maybe move that hit. If a hit's like really early and you want to move it over to be it's on the grid, then you do a quick fill and crossfade. If you get like a really bad glitch and artifact in there, then it's like, shoot, like we need to track that again, right? So keep that in mind. Again, you'll get better and better at that with experience. The more you do this, you'll know whether you can edit it or whether it needs to be tracked again. But again, it's all about having the end in mind. Having the end in mind, right? I cannot emphasize this enough. Like, we know that we can fix timing to a certain extent. We can edit. I just showed you that. We know that we can help out kick and snare and toms with samples, right? But cymbals not so much, right? Like, your cymbals need to be good. They need to be performed well. They need to sound good because you're not going to go through and replace all of your cymbals with samples, okay? That's not happening. So that's the tricky thing is that, that's why I said you're managing timing and energy because you don't want to get so lost in the timing of like the kick and the snare that you forget to listen to the cymbals because some guys, if they're really sloppy, their cymbal hands and their feet are not going to be synced. And so this is when it's really rough. But, let's say they're hitting the kick and their cymbal is like, slightly behind it. That's a problem, right? If you just focus, the kick and snare are good, then you go to edit it and it's like, it's a total mess because it's not synced up and all that stuff. That's a problem. So don't forget about listening to the cymbals because that's the thing that you can't replace later. For me, I'm always listening to make sure that the drummer is hitting the cymbals with enough energy and strength and consistency throughout the song. Like this is so crucial for your mix, right? There's like, when I was more of a beginner, I would track drums and I think, okay, this is great. It's strong, it's powerful. Even if they're hitting, the snare hard every time, they kind of like, especially if you're like, hey, you got to hit that snare harder, then they kind of forget about their cymbal hand, right? And so I've been in the case where I've recorded drums and then I'm mixing and it's really great at first, but by the time I'm getting towards the second half of the song, it's like, where's the energy? Where's the energy? It's like, and you can see the waveform. It's like he's hitting the cymbals way quieter now. And that's going to make it way harder for you to get that kind of energy and impact in your mix. So you want to make sure that you have that consistency throughout the whole song. So you've got to be guiding that performance, having the end in mind, and it does vary from drummer to drummer, right? So that's why getting big takes at first, it helps you get aware of the drummer's weaknesses. And that's also why, you saw one in the video where I set up the mics and I'm starting to get the sounds into the DAW. Notice how I didn't go, just hit your kick over and over, hit your snare over and over. I said, just play your whole kit. Because yes, I'm setting levels. I'm also listening to the drummer. How good is this guy? What's he playing? Is he on time? Does this sound sloppy? Is he hitting hard? Is he hitting good? What's the technique? Right? Like you want to have as much time as possible to like establish an idea of like, what are these guys' strengths? What are their weaknesses? Maybe he's really good with his hands. Maybe his feet are kind of sloppy, right? You've got to proceed accordingly. You've got to figure that out. And with the end in mind, you've got to adapt your approach sometimes. So some examples of that. Okay, with a decent drummer, an average decent drummer, they can generally hit hard and consistently while also being about 80% on in terms of timing. That's the average drummer. So your job in that scenario is to keep them inside that 80% ballpark of timing while also making sure they keep their energy and consistency up. Okay, so you want to make sure they're getting hard hits on snare, cymbals. You want to make sure they play their drum fills with purpose and strength. A lot of drummers, like they'll play strong on the regular beats, but then they go and do a fill and they're super wussy on it, right? So you've got to make sure that those are nice and strong. Okay, so that's kind of the general idea for an average drummer. Also, another general thing is that most drummers need to be reminded to hit harder, and they tend to get slack as the session goes on, right? And that's where you need to step in. Like, don't let them get weaker as the day goes on, as the session goes on, right? And oftentimes it's like, it's a little bit of a push and pull with the drummer, right? So you'll do a take and you'll be like, okay, man, like, let's do that again. A couple snare hits were a little bit soft that time. Make sure you keep playing hard. So then they'll do the next take and they'll hit the snare hard, but like then their timing was too far off. They weren't inside the 80% window anymore, right? So it's like, all right, man, let's have to do that again. Like your snare was good that time, but you're, rushing a little bit. So let's do it again. So the key is like, you don't settle, right? You don't settle. You have to do it again. Now, what I mean is that settling is relative, okay? Because some drummers are better than others. And so in some cases you are settling because what you really want is this. What the drummer's capable of is this. So when I say don't settle, I mean, if you think the drummer's capable of this, then don't settle for anything of this. You know you're not going to get here. That's what your editing and mixing is for. But at least don't settle for below what you think this guy can do, right? Do it again. Do it again. Push them. Try to push them a little beyond what you think, right? And that's why it helps to get the big takes and then zero in and punch in smaller sections, because maybe that one fill or whatever, maybe they're never going to nail it if they're playing the whole song. But if you can just punch in on that one spot, they might be able to do it. If you do enough takes, you might, sometimes you just randomly, luckily get one that's good, right? Now, on the other hand, if the drummer is great, okay, remember, like, oops, I have my hand switch. So you want the drums to be great here. Most people are like down here, but if the drummer's great, if he's up here, well, you're still managing his timing and his energy. Your standards just go up. It's just now, oh, this guy's up here. So now my standard isn't down here anymore. My standard's up here. So you still want to keep, whatever the skill of the drummer is, you want to keep the standard up towards the top of their skill level, right? But you're still focusing on consistency. You're still focusing on timing and managing that. Now, if your drummer really sucks, now you need to be more strategic. Okay, this is, again, starting even more with the end in mind. So example of that. Let's say you're recording a metal band. There's lots of double kick in the song, and the drummer sucks. Specifically, he sucks at double kick. Okay, I'm using this example because it's happened to me a number of times. What do you want to do in that case? I'll give you a second to think about this. Drummer sucks, lots of double kick. He sucks at the double kick. How are you going to adjust your tracking and even drum tuning approach in that case? Well, for me, like, yeah, Anthony's saying put a kick pad there instead. Yeah, that's one solution. Let's say stopping short of that, right? That's maybe the extreme solution. What else you could do? Let me see what else. Use MIDI pads, keep the bass drum low. Okay, Jade's on track here. So what I'm going to do in that case is I'm going to make that kick drum as quiet as possible in the room. Okay, so I'm going to shove a bunch of blankets or coats in there or pillows to deaden it down. Okay, so that's going to make the kick quieter. I'm going to make sure it's tuned loose so there's not a lot of sustain. Okay. And then when we're tracking, I'm mostly going to ignore it. I'm going to be listening to the cymbals and the snare and toms. I'm going to make sure that those are played as well as possible. Because in my mind, I know that I'm going to go and edit and I'm going to replace the kick drum entirely later on. Now that's a bit of an advanced technique in terms of how to like separate the editing and then replace the kick and edit it separately. Something I show you how to do in my full program. But to everyone else's ears, like in the room, they might be listening to the take and like, of course the band, like they're worried about the double kick parts being right, you know? And so they might be like, oh, like the kick was like really sketchy there. That was horrible. But for me, I'm going with that take because I'm listening to the cymbals and hands because I know I need those parts to stay intact and I know I'm going to fix the kick, right? So I'm thinking of everything else, right? So that's an example. If the timing is really bad on everything, then again, I'm still going to focus on the cymbals primarily. I'm going to make sure they're hit well enough. I'm going to try to get the timing on those close enough that I can, so I know I can edit it. I'm not going to be super concerned about consistency. Like there's kind of a scale, right? So like if the drummer's really good timing wise, then my attention shifts toward like I don't really have to think about whether this guy's close to the grid or not because he is like he's just always really close to the grid. Like some drummers are just really good, locked in with their timing. You can relax on that. You know that like, sure, they might screw up and rush a take or whatever, but for the most part, timing's locked in. Okay, free up your mind. Now you're focusing on consistency. How hard are they hitting? Is it consistent every time, right? Sliding scale the other way. If timing sucks, my focus is away from consistency I'm not focusing so much on how hard they're hitting kick and snare because, okay, now I need to lean on samples more because it's going to take all the time that we have just to get this guy to be close enough to the click so that I can edit it, right? We have limited amount of time. I'm not going to waste time trying to get every snare hit perfect. I'm going to spend time making sure that it's close enough timing wise so that I can edit it, right? And I know I'm going to rely more on samples in the mix, okay? That also means, again, for a really sloppy drummer timing wise, it also means I'm going to try and deaden the drums as much as possible, like a lot more, because I have to chop and edit the drums more, right? The less decay, the less ring out I have on the drums, the easier I can edit without artifacts. You guys, maybe you've experienced this if you've edited much drums in your day. Like, let's say a really ringy snare, right? Like ping, ping. Well, if you've got that ring out on the snare and you've got a kick that's like an eighth note or a quarter note after that, and the drummer hits the snare, ping, and then boom, like hits the kick after that, but the kick is really early. Well, then what do you need to do? You need to chop that waveform where the kick hit is, and you need to move that kick hit back so that it's on time on the grid. But you know what you've just done is you've put a cut right in the middle of that ring out of the snare. And so what that's going to sound like is bing, ding, ding. You're going to get that little hiccup in the snare ring out. Okay? So if the drummer sucks, I'm literally in the studio. I'm literally like moon gels on everything, deaden everything, make the kick quiet, right? If you know that you're going to have to like do a crazy amount of editing and things are going to have to move a lot, then you do not want stuff ringing out on your drums. Okay? So this is the most important part of the process, guys. It's like looking ahead. What's going to happen in editing? What are my editing capabilities? What's going to happen in mixing? How much am I going to try and rely on samples based on how good this drummer is? Right? It's all about like thinking ahead to that, having the end in mind, and then bringing that back into the present in the session and getting the best that you can get out of what you've got. And unfortunately, these trade-offs is just a reality of being an engineer producer. Like ideally, hopefully, guys, my wish for all of you guys is that you can become amazing engineers and mixers and producers so that you can just say no to all the sketchy bands and you can only work with like really great musicians and you don't really have to worry about, you know, all these workarounds that I've just described for you. But it takes time to get there. And the only way you are going to get there is if you kind of pay your dues and climb up with the local bands, you know, like for me, guys, the big breaks that I had in my career, it wasn't like landing the big projects. It was getting those little local bands who nobody knew about. And, you know, these examples with the double kick and stuff, like I've lived through these examples and it's like, okay, this is a local band. Nobody knows who these guys are, but guess what? My standard's up here. So if this guy can't play the kick drum, guess what? I'm doing everything I just described to you. And these drums are going to sound awesome in the end. Even though this guy's not a very good drummer. Guess what happens to that local band? Ooh, this is a good record. People start listening. They start playing more shows. They go on tours. They get a new drummer. They get picked up by a label. All of a sudden, my name's attached to that, right? So it's about working with the artists that come to you. And if you have all the skills, like that's why it's so crucial to be what I call a full stack producer, right? You've got to be an expert in tracking, expert in editing, expert in mixing. Because do you see how if you're a really good editor and mixer, this influences your tracking decisions? It all contributes to each other, right? Sorry if I went on a little bit of a rant there, but again, this is like my favorite kind of thing to talk about because this is really what like separates the best from the rest. One last tip. You want to have the drum part written and know the drum part beforehand. Okay, really try to avoid getting in the situation where you're like changing drum patterns and drum fills on the fly as you're tracking the real take. Because if you're trying to work on a new drum fill in the middle of like the real recording session, the take, then the drummer's gonna be focusing on the wrong things, right? All of a sudden the drummer's thinking about, I gotta come up with a new fill, and now I've only played this fill twice, and I've got to try and nail it here. Guess what? Now they're not focusing on their timing, they're not focusing on their strength and consistency. Okay, so do pre-production when you can. If you can't do pre-production, at least do like a rough run through of the track, even before you've replaced drum heads and stuff.
rough run through, get some ghost guide tracks down, and then ask the band like, hey, are there any spots where you're kind of unsure of like what the kick pattern is or what the drum fill is going to be? Like, let's work on that first. That way you can kind of like just have a rough take, a laid back kind of vibe environment with the band where you can just work on stuff and the drummer doesn't have the pressure of like trying to nail it and figure out the part at the same time. Like, figure out the part first. Then once he's confident, gives him some time to practice, and then boom, you go for the real take, all right? Okay, questions. Let's hold to the end, okay? So do me a favor, just hold your questions till the end of this because maybe I'll cover what you're asking. Let's move on. So that's kind of like performance management, artist management, really important stuff there. Let's talk about room, okay? If you're at home or you've got a small room, an unideal room, a couple of you guys have asked that throughout the day here. Let's start with just if you have less inputs, right? A lot of interfaces out there, there's 8 channels of input, right? So what would you do in that case? If you are limited to 8 channels, you're going to go kick, snare top, snare bottom, tom 1, tom 2, overheads, left and right. And then you've got one more mic left, right? So it's either going to be a mono room or it's going to be a hi-hat, depending on the song. If there's lots of detailed, close hi-hat, you might put the mic there and you're just going to use reverb in the mix for the ambience. Or if, it's almost no hi-hat in the song or it's all really open, loud hi-hat, maybe you get away with not having a hi-hat mic, you go room instead. Or maybe there's an extra tom. There's 3 toms. So you need to sacrifice the bottom snare mic and put that on the tom instead. That's what I would think about for having 8 inputs. But most of those 8 input interfaces, they also have an ADAT in, a digital in. And you can find like what I did in the early days is I had 8 channels of like a good interface. And then I had this really old Focusrite Octopre, it was worth like a few $100, and it had an ADAT out and it had 8 preamps. So pick up a cheap unit like that just to give you a bunch of extra channels, hook up the ADAT out from that into the ADAT in of your main interface, and that's going to give you 8 more channels. Okay, so really highly recommend doing that. One sec. A next tip for home studios and small rooms. You want to deaden those rooms as much as possible. So lots of acoustic treatment. Okay. I think someone asked earlier, like, if my room is small or whatever, like, should I treat it a lot or should I put the mics against a reflective surface? Look, if your room is smaller than like 15 feet in any direction, like, you're probably 90% chance you're not going to get a good room sound. You're just not. There's not enough space for the sound and reflections to develop in a nice way. The room's not going to sound good. Okay, so you want to deaden the room. Try to take the room out of the equation as a factor, right? And then you also want to put your drum kit in the deadest, driest, most treated spot. Okay, you're not gonna get big room ambience out of a small room. Okay, I made these mistakes. If you check out my studio here, let me blow up these pictures here. So here's a picture. Again, this room's like 15 by 12-ish, so very small room, low ceilings. When I first got in this room, I didn't have any treatment. I mean, there was a little bit of this foam on the walls, but that does absolutely nothing, right? So I had no treatment. I would just kind of put the kit in the middle of the room. Man, the drum sounded terrible. The room sounded terrible. Not good. Here's another picture. So you can see just facing the other way. Really small room. Nothing on the walls. Did not work out well. Now, let me show you a different picture here. So this is the same room. I changed the floor out, got a bunch of panels made. Some of them I did myself, and carpets on the floor. So like I tried everything. I was like, man, I need to get a good drum room sound. So I would take the carpets up. So there was bare floor. So there's more reflection. I did exactly what that other person asked here. I put the mics pointing towards the wall here, seeing if I can get reflections. Guess what? It always sounded terrible. The room was just too small. So I didn't start getting good or good drum sounds out of this space until I just really deadened everything. And it didn't take a ton, right? Carpets on the floor, and then you can see I've got these 2x4 panels, fiberglass panels, along the wall with about a foot in between them, 1.5 feet. In the corner here, I stacked them on top of each other, straddling the corner, so that gave me a good bass trap. I really noticed an improvement in my low end of the kick drum after I did that.
And then up top there, you see I've got these ceiling clouds, and a friend of mine just built these wooden frames, and we laid the insulation in there, and then hung them from the ceiling. So what I did here is like, look, I'm not putting the drum kit in the middle of the room here. I'm putting it right over in the back corner there, or not the back corner, but along the back wall where that red carpet is, because right over top of that, where the cymbals are, I've got the ceiling cloud, right? So I've got absorption right above the cymbals so that the sound's not bouncing back. And then I've also got the big bass trap in the corner, and I've got 3 panels right behind the drummer, and then 1 right off to the side where the hi-hat's going to be, right? So this is the most treated part of the room. So I'm going to put the kit there. I was just on a call with one of our members in the PPS, and he was showing me his room and stuff. And he had the drums in like the middle of the room, but he had his desk like way back in this other side along the wall where he had all of his treatment was like right there around his desk. I was like, dude, okay, you might need to invest a little more money in some more panels, but like you need to move the kit over there. Like he was complaining on his drum sounds. There was just way too much bleed and nastiness and stuff. It's like, okay, all your treatment that's around this big room is a big space. Like bring all that treatment over to that one spot. Put up the panels across the corners, put them all around, and put your kit there. Move your workstation somewhere else, right? And get a few more panels for there. But you need to deaden that area, put the kit there. You're just not going to get a big room sound out of a small room. Just don't even try. Just deaden it. At least that way you've got nice, punchy, clean, clear, close mics. And then that's where the character mic comes in, right? Find a spot, usually on the other side of a door. Back to this room. If you see over on the left there, you see the back wall to the left, there's a door that's closed there. That's where that little like 4 foot by 4 foot little mudroom entranceway, that's where I put my mono character mic or my stereo pair of mics right in there. So the drum kit would be right on the other side of that door. And then the mics were in there, and it sounded huge. It sounded awesome. So there's always a spot, right? And at this point, I'm just as comfortable being in a small kind of crappy room as I would be in a big one, right? You just have to follow the same miking approach, the same drum tuning approach, use the same type of mics, and then just find any type of character spot that you can in the room. There's always a spot. There's always something cool that you can find. And this formula I've just taught you guys, it works everywhere. It works everywhere. And try not to add to it. Don't subtract from it. Don't try to make it more complicated until you're getting predictable results with this. Right? I always tell people that come into a program, look, the reason you're here, the reason you invested into this is because what you're doing right now is not getting you where you want to be, right? Like if you guys already had slamming sounding drum tracks when you track drums, you probably wouldn't have, taken all of this time to watch this training and to, spend money on the ticket to this workshop, right? So the mistake I see a lot of people making, because there's so many tutorials and opinions out there on YouTube, is like, they'll hear my tips. They're like, okay, Jordan likes this. Is that cool? I picked up that cool tip. But then they'll also like try to pull in like, but this other guy said this and he likes this on overhead. So I'm going to combine this approach with this, and you try to cobble together like this Frankenstein approach of like all these different tips that you like from different people, right? It's not going to work. Okay. You need to follow one formula. Okay. Don't change it. Don't complicate it until you're getting predictable results from this, right? If you can go to your own studio, your own projects, implement everything exactly as I've taught you here, you are going to hear the difference and you are going to hear an improvement, right? And then once you've got that down and you're totally confident with this and you understand what's working and why it's working, and you can do it with any drummer, any space, any song, then it's like, okay, now you've got some expertise. So now you can make a strategic change to be like, hey, I heard someone else talk about using this type of mic on overheads or whatever, or doing this on snare or whatever. Then it's like, then yeah, go ahead, make that change. Change it up. See how it sounds, because now you have a reference point. You're like, okay, I know what I'm doing. I know how to do it this way. I know it works. Let's see what happens if I change this a little bit. Then you can actually judge it accurately and know like, well, did that make it better or did that make it worse? Right? You've got to have like a baseline. You've got to have a baseline formula blueprint. All right. But I want to encourage you guys, like all of our members, all of our students who apply this workflow, they immediately post in our community and they talk about how they got the best drum sounds they've ever got, like first try, like it's going to work, guys. So here's an example. This is Elia. He said, my first drum recording session, thanks to PPS, I achieved great results and already got a new booking for drum recording. Okay, that's what it's all about. You can tell just by looking at the position of these mics, right? That he's followed it exactly. He's followed the blueprint. And it works. Let me get rid of that. Let me show you one more here. This is Nico. He's a drummer too. He says, my dry drums sound at least 69,000 times better than my processed ones did before starting PPS. So that's the goal, right, guys? It's like starting at the end in mind, getting the best possible sound at the source, not trying to fix it in the mix. You want your raw drums, your dry drums, to sound better than most of the processed drums of like the other home studios in your area, right? And that's what I'm hoping to give you guys here. So last thing before we get to Q&A, what if you have no studio? What if you've got no drum room? I don't know if any of you guys are in that spot right now, but I want to introduce you to a guy named Roloff. That's a Dutch name. I don't really pronounce it right, he would say, but I say it Roloff. He's my right-hand man in the pro production system. He's a coach inside the system. He's actually a member who many years ago, he started buying my training. He came up and, he was able to build a full-time career in the studio. He went full-time as a mixer. He's working on more and more notable projects, charges close to $1,000 a song now. Used to be a full-time house painter. Now is a full-time audio engineer, and he helps train people inside the program as well, give feedback on mixes. Amazing engineer, amazing guy. But here's the cool thing. He accomplished all that and built a full-time studio career without a studio. He's got a space in his house where he mixes and he can record DI guitars and stuff, but he never had a room to track drums in. He did it all remote. Okay, so he would go to practice spaces. Here's some pictures of him. Practice spaces, even people's houses. Like that's a picture of him in someone's like apartment or condo, downtown Amsterdam, I think, doing a project there, right? So he just made his rig mobile and he would go anywhere, but he used this exact same approach. So I asked him to do a quick video message for you guys, just to share his experience and how you can adapt this if you don't have your own space to work in. Maybe you don't have control over treatment and all this and gear and all this stuff, and you need to make a mobile rig. Like, don't let that stop you, okay? He's an example of someone, he could have been just like, well, I could try to learn from Jordan and I could try to build a career at this, but I don't have a studio, I don't have a space to track drums, so like I'm kind of stuck. I can't get clients. No, he didn't let that stop him. He was like, I can find a way around this. I'm going to learn how to become an expert at this, and I'm going to figure it out. And figure it out he did. So let me cue up this short video here from Roloff. He's going to give you some tips on what to do if you're tracking remotely and don't have your own space.
Hey everybody, my name is Roelof and I'm one of the coaches for Hardcore Music Studio. It's awesome to meet you guys. I started as a student inside this program. I'm now one of the coaches and I do a lot of mix reviews, a lot of Q&A calls, etc. And by the way, also if you choose to apply for the program, then I'll be getting in touch with you personally just to see if you'd be a good fit for the program and whether or not it would make sense to keep working together with Jordan and me. And the reason why I'm coming on today is because, well, some of you might be wondering, like, how useful is everything that I've learned today when I don't have my own drum room, right? And I just want to make sure that every single person here knows that having your own drum room is by no means a requirement in order for you to become a professional producer. Because and I'm speaking from my own experience here, because I went from full beginner, like 0 clients, super amateur when I joined this program, to now being a full-time producer with a lot of clients, right? And I still don't have my own drum room, and I think I will never have my own drum room. So what I do instead is I just take a super simple mobile recording rig and I take that to a rehearsal space and I track drums there. That's how I got all of my clients pretty much, and that's how I built my career from the ground up, by doing mobile tracking sessions. So mobile recording, that's the big secret, right? Anyway, there's like a few unique challenges, or like few different things about mobile recording that you have to be aware of if you want to go the same route. And the main thing that a lot of aspiring engineers seem to worry about is that well, the room itself is not going to sound great, right? They seem to worry mostly about the rooms and the acoustics and all of that stuff. And over the years, I've noticed that whenever I bring up mobile recording to aspiring engineers, well, a lot of them start thinking like, oh no, that will never work. Like all bands are going to object to that. Nobody will want to work like that. And the rooms are going to sound bad and yada, 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 right? And well, you'll see a lot of online debate about this whole thing as well, right? Like you can be the type of person that goes like super technical and gets down into all the reasons of like why it can't work and why it won't work and it will sound bad and yada, yada, right? Or you can become the type of person that chooses to just go out there, actually start doing it, and you'll see that you can actually get great sounding results in rehearsal spaces. And that way you're actually starting to build your portfolio, building your clientele, and that way you start building your career, right? And if that's you, if the latter is you, then I'm happy to tell you that pretty much everything that you've learned today will translate beautifully in pretty much every single room. And I'm speaking from personal experience here. Like you can literally copy all the methods that you've seen today, use them in any room, and you'll get great sounding results. And here's why that will work actually, because like in every single drum tracking session, there's a lot of different factors going on, right? And what I mean is like, well, you got a different drum kit every time, you got a different drummer every time, and also a different room pretty much every single time, right? So there's a lot of things that are pretty much outside of your control and that are going to be different in every session, right? So you need at least one part of the whole recording chain to be super familiar and super predictable to you in order to get repeatable, great sounding results, right? And that should be your gear first and foremost. So I highly recommend to use the exact same gear on every single mobile recording session, and also your recording methods, right? And what I mean is that the way you tune the drums and the way you mic up the drums, right? Those things are not only far more important and contribute far more to the sound than the room itself, but also if you repeat your methods and how you go about those things, then you can also pretty much guarantee that you'll capture great quality source tones in every situation that you get, right? And so that's how you get over the whole like room issue. And I've tracked major label artists in rehearsal spaces, and they are completely fine with that. So that shouldn't hold you back, okay? Another challenge is, of course, that you're usually going to be in the same room as the drum kit itself, right? So the sound checking process looks a little bit different than it would in an actual studio. And what I usually do, so I just track a little bit, I record a little bit of drums, and then I play it back to see what the raw tones sound like that we're capturing, right? But when you think about it, actually, that is not super different from being in a studio, right? Because if you have to move a microphone for whatever reason, well, you're going to have to get up from your chair regardless of what room you're in, right? If you're in a rehearsal space or in a studio, you're still going to have to walk over to the drum kit and move the mic or whatever, or tune the drum, whatever is necessary, right? So it's not that different. And speaking of monitoring, by the way, like the way I like to monitor the raw source tones that we're capturing is literally just by bringing a small pair of monitors to the rehearsal space with me. Because well, firstly, I really dislike working on headphones. That's just a personal thing. I don't like working on headphones. And I would also hate to share my headphones with every single band member to see if they're happy with the tones that we're capturing as well, right? So I really just like to bring monitors, get everybody involved in the tones that we're capturing, and get the band stoked, right? Get them stoked with the tones that you're capturing. So that's how I go about monitoring in a mobile recording session. And then the last thing I want to mention, of course, is mobile recording gear, right? Because this is something that a lot of people seem to overcomplicate for no reason, and it doesn't have to be complicated at all. This is also another part where you can become like a keyboard warrior and make cases for why you really, really need those fancy preamps and whatnot, or you can just go out and make records, right? So what I've been using is a super sick Focusrite Scarlett and a Behringer extension preamp. This is fine. This gives you 16 inputs and 2 headphone outputs, which is pretty much all you need for mobile recording sessions, right? And in terms of microphones, you already know what to get, right? Dynamics for the shells, some small diaphragm condensers for your overheads and cymbals, and preferably some large diaphragm condensers for rooms, etc. And then you'll be more than good to go. So I hope this helps. There's a lot of workarounds, and you really, really don't need your own drum room in order to start building your career as a producer. Once again, if you choose to apply for the program, I'd love to get in touch with you to talk about exactly what you want to achieve, and well, we're going to see if you'll be a good fit for our program and keep working with Jordan and I. All right, take care.
So I want to hear from you guys. Not only your questions, but what are your main takeaways from today? What stood out the most? Was there a kind of mindset shift that you got? Anything surprise you? Anything unexpected? Anything that you're excited to try out? What's your main takeaway? Just post it in the chat here. I'd love to hear it. I'm sure everyone else would as well. And then if you've got any final questions about what we just talked about, performance, workflow, room stuff, you can drop your question in there. We'll take maybe another 10 minutes for that. All right, if your room just sucks for drums, can you just deaden it like you mentioned and add a really nice live room plugin later? Also, I'm really good at Logic Pro X for years. Time to transition. Okay, yeah, exactly. If your room sucks, you just deaden it, like I said. And yeah, like so you should still try to find a character spot, like outside the door or something, or in the attic. I don't know, like is there some room that's beside that space so you can throw a mic in there and try to get some character and some space on the drums? Do that. But then yeah, like if you have to, you just use a reverb plugin in the mix. It's not as good as having some sort of character or room track, but that is kind of the last ditch kind of workaround there. All right, couple takeaways here that I'm going to read here. Let's see. Okay, tracking drums is much more easier and straightforward than YouTube land would have people believe. Thank you for saying that, Ricky. That's like my number one goal is to simplify complexity. Okay, so I love that you said that. Thank you. How to approach workflow and working with the drummer and the different alternatives to poor performances. The way to treat bad drummers. Yeah. Clarity and confidence over the whole process. Excellent. Little changes make a huge difference when getting a pro sound. How you accomplish getting a session going. Do you sometimes... Okay, there's a question. Just looking at the takeaways here. After 25 years of doing this, it's really not what I don't have, it's what I don't know. Thank you. I found a way to fix that. Awesome. Amazing, John. So happy to hear that. And kudos to you, man, for being open to learn, because, you know, how many people do you know who have, like, forget 25 years. You people are like, I've been doing this for 5 years. No one can teach me anything, right? So you've got to have, like, you know, that humble, hungry attitude to learn. So I love that, dude. Peter said, I'm really surprised Roloff made a living without a drum room. That's been a huge stumbling block. Dude, so many people tell me this. Like, we'll talk about maybe joining the program or working with me in mentorship. Like, yeah, I do want to get clients, but the reason I'm not, like, trying to work with clients is because I don't have a drum room to record them. It's like, there's a lot of solutions to that. Roloff just showed you, like, you don't even have to go into a fancy studio. Like, you go to their practice space, right? Go to their practice space, go to their house, go to someone's basement. Like, you can find a way to do it. There is always a way to overcome the obstacle, right? So just not letting anything hold you back from accomplishing what you want really is the key. Do you have clients from Germany? I got the concern over here that hardcore music isn't as popular in the U.S. Oh yeah, for sure. Germany is our second biggest group of members compared to the U.S. Yeah, it goes like U.S., Germany, and then Canada and UK are similar. So absolutely, there's definitely appetite there. Again, that's another obstacle. That's a barrier, right? We hear reasons like, I don't mean to be harsh on anyone here, but let's just like big picture. This is the common excuses, right? It's too competitive. There's too many studios in my area. There's not enough bands in my area. I don't have a drum room, right? Like, these things are not true, guys. These things are not true, okay? There are enough bands out there. It's not too saturated. Here's the key. You just got to be really good. Yes, there's a whole bunch of people with home studios and gear now. Guess what? They all suck. They're all mediocre. Okay, if you learn how to do this really well, then they'll stay down here and you'll go,
because your stuff's going to sound that much better than theirs. And it won't matter if there's 100 studios in your city. You're going to be better than most of them. You're going to win. That's how it works. Okay, cool. Let's get questions. Thanks for sharing the takeaways, guys. If you got more, definitely drop it in the chat. There was a question up here, I think. Yes. Do you sometimes ask the drummer to make compromises for the drum setup to reduce bleed or get better miking positions? If so, what kind of compromises? Yes, I would say like the more I've kind of grown in my career and like stepped up the ladder a little bit, it happens a bit less because typically, not always, but typically I'm working with more experienced, better drummers, right? And they've been in the studio before, and they don't have wacky setups. But totally, like I have been in those cases earlier on when it was like less experienced drummers, and sometimes they've got wacky setups. Yeah, sometimes you have to like. Usually it's when their cymbals are like down really low or up really high or something. So if their cymbals are down too low and their ride cymbal is like literally halfway covering the floor tom, and there's like no way you can mic that thing because you're pretty much miking the ride, not the tom, then yeah, it's like you got to go in, and I've had to be like, hey, listen, man, like it's really easy to get them to change because you just show them the mic. Be like, hey, I need to get this mic on this drum. And right now I can't because of where your cymbal is. So we need to raise this up, all right? And most of the time when you do that, the drummer will just end up keeping it there for the rest of their life because they're like, oh, well, I need to do this for recording. And it feels more comfortable, so I might as well just do this forever, right? So yeah, sometimes it's usually just cymbals being too low, and you just got to move them up a little bit. Occasionally you'll get someone trying to be Travis Barker, and they've got their cymbals like they're like jumping to like hit the cymbals. And it's just ridiculous, and it's too close to the ceiling, so you drop those down. But yeah, generally it's pretty rare that you have to do any crazy adjustments to the drum kit setup. But yeah, sometimes you do. You should be like, hey man, like you got to work with me a little here because like I can't get this mic in here because you've got like these 4 splash cymbals right over top of your toms. Like I need to mic your toms, you know. Usually it's not a problem, guys. It's pretty obvious, right? When they can see that you're trying to put a mic and there's no physical space, they're not really going to argue with you. They're gonna try and work with you on that. All right, Pig Pretty said, my takeaway from this is that information is worth its weight in gold. All I've ever done is mobile recording. Thanks, Jordan. You're very welcome, man. Thanks for attending here. Jade says, excellent. I'm psyched to implement the structure of your miking rejection angles. I love the no excuses. Don't settle for mediocre. Awesome. Any tips for recording 4 mics on an SSL-12? I'm not familiar with that, what the SSL-12 is. But yeah, you can't really do it, man. I mean, I guess you could do kick, snare, and overheads, 4 inputs, but like, where's the toms, right? It's just like, you're just creating more work for yourself later on. Like, there comes a time, guys, where you do, certainly the knowledge is worth 100 times more than the gear, but you do need the minimum of gear, right? So I would say if you're recording rock drums, like you just need more than 4 inputs. You just do, right? If this is something that you want to do regularly and be able to record drums, you need to have like at least 8 inputs, right? So, sometimes you got to invest towards your goals, right? So if you've only got 4, you probably need more if you're serious about recording drums. Ollie Miles, you have 1 room mic available. Would you just go for a character mic and use the gated snare trick instead of trying to get a conventional room sound? Yes, 100%. 100%. Will these streams be available to watch again? Yep. I think you guys have it for 14 days, the replays. We'll send them all out. Question about drum editing. What about elastic audio? You use cutting in your example. Yeah, elastic audio I don't like for drums. I don't really like it for anything. Sometimes vocals, but yeah, definitely not on drums. Just cut them. Because when you're cutting and moving, you're not damaging the audio at all. You're not performing any processing on that waveform. You're keeping the sound 100% intact. Right? So all the way, cutting, beat detective, that's the way to go. Do you have some tips for drummers or musicians in general that are stubborn and have a bad attitude?
Yes, I'll say this. Most of the time, stubbornness and not wanting to cooperate with you is due to insecurity. Okay? It's like, it's like the bully on the playground who's like, he's all tough and he's like pushing everyone around, but like inside he's like goes home and cries at night because he's so insecure, right? Like this is what happens if you got a musician who's like really fighting you and is kind of aggressive, like about not wanting to do what you're out wanting them to do. Chances are they're insecure. They're insecure, okay? So they're going to be worried that they're going to be exposed in some way, their weakness, right? Quick story, I was recording this band, pretty well-known band, and the singer, they had very like catchy melodic courses and everything, and so like I wanted to do harmonies, and I just assumed that we were going to track harmonies on the record. So I'm like, okay, like we got the lead vocals down, like let's do some harmonies on this song. And he's like, no, we're not doing harmonies. Like I don't want to do that. That's going to ruin our vibe. Like we're a heavy band. Like we're not the Backstreet Boys. Like we're not going to do layers and harmonies. Like we've always just on all our last 2 records, we never did harmonies. Like I hate that sound. Like blah blah blah. Like, well, aren't you trying to like be more of a mainstream? Like we're trying to make it more of a mainstream polished record. Like this, it's just so natural. It's going to be so good. He's like, no. In fact, there's a huge argument between me and the rest of the band was on my side. He was against it. He literally stormed into the studio, slammed the doors. He went and like sat in his car, sat outside for like literally like 30 minutes. Then he came back in, he calmed down a bit and we continued talking about it. And I was like, look, man, like just trust me on this. Like I'll help you create some harmonies here. Let's just try it on one song. And if you don't like it, we don't have to do it. But the rest of the band really wants to do this. I think it's going to make your record to another level. So let's try. So anyways, I help him create the harmonies so that he can, like I created fake harmonies and melodies so he could sing along with them. Because here's the thing. It came to light throughout this process. He said something that was like, well, I've just never done it before. So the reason he was so mad and stubborn is because he did not know how to sing harmonies, right? So here I am, dude, let's go. Let's do some harmonies. In his mind, he's freaking out. I can't sing a harmony. I don't know what a harmony is. I'm this tattooed singer of this touring rock band, and like I'm the front man, and like, but I actually like can't sing harmonies. I don't know how to find harmonies. He's freaking out, right? But I was able to help him with that. And then once we did it and we came back in and he heard the results, he freaking loved it. At the end of the project, he's giving me a hug. He was just like, thanks, man. I love how this turned out. Thanks for sticking with me on that. So that's just a story to give you an example of like, that's usually what's the problem is. And I found it the same thing with guitar players when they're like, even drummers, let's stick with drums. When they come in and they're like, and you said, bring in your drum heads, we'll put them on fresh in the studio. And they come in and they've already put them on. Guess why they did that? Because they're probably not confident in putting the drum heads on and tuning it. And they're worried that they're not doing it properly and that they're going to be embarrassed in front of me. And so they do it ahead of time and use some excuse like, oh, I need to work them in. Like, it just sounds better. But like, again, that's why if you know how to do this stuff, you take the pressure off. Be like, okay, like, no, let's start fresh. And then you grab the drum and you start doing it. And then like, oh, I don't have to worry. This guy's got it. So that's how to think through that, man. Every person's different. Every situation's different. But like, that's the principle is like most of the stubbornness and bad attitude is insecurity in disguise. And they're trying to avoid a situation where they're like embarrassed about something. And so, you can't really just come out and say that. It's not like you're like, hey, dude, like, I know the reason you're not cooperating with me is because you're just insecure and really you suck at this and like you're about to be embarrassed. Like you can't say that. But you work with them, right? And you just try to take some stuff off of, like, just make it clear that like you're on their side, and also just provide a little bit of compromise. Like usually in those situations, it'll be like, okay, listen, like I will try it your way if you'll try it my way. Okay. So we're going to do it like this. Let's get it down. Then we'll do a take your way. And then we'll see. Everyone in the band You can hear it. You can hear the difference. And collectively, we can all decide on what's better. Usually, most people will go along with that, right? Most people are not going to say, no, that's not going to happen. So that's usually the tactic. Sometimes, like, then you'll just start doing it your way, and you won't even have to do it their way, because once they hear it your way, they'll be like, okay, that's cool. Like, no, don't worry. Like, we don't have to do it the other way. But that's at least a compromise. So hopefully that helps, man. And that was a long answer, but definitely an important part of being a producer. What would you do if the drummer can't nail the parts as good as it needs to be for editing to be unnoticeable? What if the drummer simply cannot cut it? How would you go about it? Yeah, there's a couple more tricks that we talk about kind of in the program. One of them is you can slow the tempo down a little bit, not too much, but slow it down by like 5 BPM max. They're still going to be sloppy on it, but at least if they're playing it badly slower, then you can actually speed up the tempo after you snap it to the grid, and it's going to create less space in between the hits that you're moving around, which is going to make your edits more transparent. So that's one solution, is to try and track it slower. If they simply cannot cut it, like, it's been a long time since I've had that scenario, because like at a certain point you got to figure that out ahead of time, right? So I would recommend, like, before you book any project with a band, you ask them to send you a demo or send you their last recording or something, right? So at least if they've got a rough demo and you're hearing the drummer play, and it's like, if you can tell it's like, this isn't even remotely on time, then you're like, you know what, guys, I think I'm going to pass on this project, right? So that's why, like, you just kind of eliminate that up front. Now, if you're in that situation, like this, that's tough. That's pretty awkward. If you really can't struggle through it and piece it together, then you're probably having a conversation with the entire band present, and you're probably suggesting doing MIDI drums at that point, right? Or you're suggesting getting rid of the kick drum, putting a kick pad there instead, because oftentimes, like with a bad drummer, if you get rid of the kick, it gives you a lot more flexibility in editing. You can deaden the drums, do those tricks I talked about. You might be able to get away with it then, but that's when it's like, it's better to figure that out ahead of time, so you don't have to have those awkward conversations in the studio. But you might have to, if you're just like, listen, guys, like, here, watch, I'm going to try and edit this, put it on time, but listen, it's on time, but you can hear that it's all wonky. The cymbals are all clicky and poppy. It's like, you hear all these artifacts, like, it's not going to work. Like, and we've been doing this the entire day. Like, we don't have time to do this. So either we need to cancel this project, or we need to go MIDI drums. So that's probably what I would do in that case, dude. All right, Dennis said, I was surprised to know about overheads placed and centered around a snare drum instead of a kick. Also, tuning the kick drum loose. Character mic is a great tip. Thanks for sharing. Very welcome, Dennis. Go-Kart Mozart says, I can get 8 inputs by using 2 audio interfaces at the same time. Is that a bad idea? No, that's totally fine. Yeah, that should be fine. I mean, I don't know the details exactly of the setup, but I was talking about before about using 2 interfaces and having one as your main and then using the ADAT from one into the other one. So however that's working, as long as they're synced, like one's going to be the master clock of the interface, right? And the other one's going to be following that. As long as they're synced and they play well together, then yeah, you got to go for that. John, okay, let's take this as the last question, guys. John's asking, do you prefer to record the whole band along with the drummer, or just 1 or 2 elements like guitar and vocals? The most common thing I'll do is I'll get the guitar player to do what I call a ghost guitar track. So he'll just play with the click in the control room, and we'll just get like the entire guitar part for the song down. So the drummer's playing along with that guitar track and the click. That's typically what I'm doing. Now, on more advanced projects where we've done more extensive pre-production, we might have more elements than that. We might have rough tracks of everything. And so the drummer can play along with everything if he wants, right? But generally, we're not having like multiple people playing at the same time. Sometimes you could have like, sorry, someone's calling. Let me get rid of that. Sometimes you could have like the guitar player playing along with the drummer as he's tracking. That's fine. But typically, even if we do that, I'll be like, okay, let's just get a guide guitar track down. Maybe if the guitar player is kind of sketchy, just playing to a click, I'll get the drummer in at the same time. We'll do a take of the guitar and the drums together. And if the guitar's good enough there for a rough take, then the guitar player can go and sit down, and we can just use that guitar take for the rest of drum tracking. You know what I mean? So yeah, you want to get the drummer's focus and your focus just on the drums, right? There's only so many things you can hold in your head. Like, you could tell how many things I talked about of like what you're thinking about as an engineer and as you're doing all this stuff. Definitely as you get more experience, it becomes more second nature, especially the miking part and all that. Like, it becomes easy. It becomes automatic. You know the blueprint. You don't have to worry about that. You're just focusing on performance and stuff. But you want to just try to be thinking about less things if possible in the studio. So let's wrap it up there, guys. Again, if you've got more questions about production, anything, definitely submit an application for our program. If you want to join the program, you can get almost $300 off it as a thanks to buying a ticket to this workshop. And rest assured, every question you can have can be answered inside the full program. So thanks, guys. Hope you got a lot of value out of this. I'm sure I'll be seeing some of you inside the full program, and I really look forward to working with you in there and hearing your progress. So take care, guys. Appreciate you, and we'll see you next time. Bye.